Chapter 8:12. It was very lively at the city gate. Thousands of Tang soldiers walked into the city gate one after another. They had just returned from a tough battle. Their clothes were ragged, they looked tired, and they were all heavily or lightly injured. Countless citizens of Chang lined the streets to welcome the returning soldiers from the front line. There was still no noisy gongs and drums, but there were warm smiles and waving hands. This was the first rotation of the Tang army since the war began. Most of the troops that had withdrawn from the front were settled in various counties, and only a small part of them returned to Chang'an. The imperial court of the Tang Empire had shown almost perfect administrative ability and stunning efficiency during the war. Since the recruitment order was issued, hundreds of thousands of former veterans had either spontaneously or organized replenishment to the front lines. All kinds of materials were continuously transported to the front lines, which finally gave the Tang Empire a chance to take a breather. The tragic war was still going on. The ceremony to welcome the returning soldiers was solemn but simple, and the ceremony in Chang'an was no exception. But the Empress's presence still attracted many people. An ordinary carriage was parked beside the state highway outside the city. The bustling city gate became quiet as people left, but the carriage seemed to have no intention of leaving. It stayed in the same place. Chang'an people were very vigilant during the war. It didn't take long for someone to notice the abnormality of the carriage and report it to the City Patrol Division. The soldiers of the City Patrol Division went to ask. When they saw clearly who was sitting in the carriage, they quickly apologized and left, which attracted many curious gazes. A hand lifted the cyan curtain and Ning Ke looked through the window at the distance of the state highway frozen by the winter. When he finally saw dust flying, he got off the carriage with the help of his walking stick. Dozens of Tang soldiers returned to Chang'an. Judging from their weapons and mounts, they should be the cavalrymen of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. The Valiant Cavalry Battalion was directly under the command of the Imperial Palace and was a real noble army. In terms of status, it was even higher than the Yulin Royal Guards. But now the cavalrymen of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion looked even worse than the ordinary Tang soldiers who had entered the city. Ning Ke looked at the man on the horse and said, "I'm really not used to seeing you in leather armor." The man was covered in dust, but he still had a heroic spirit. Hearing Ning Ke's words, he smiled and said, "Since I'm in the army and not collecting rent in Chang'an, I can't wear those old clothes." He was Cao Shaoshu, who had led the Valiant Cavalry Battalion to the eastern border. Cao Shaoshu jumped off the horse. Before he could speak, he started coughing. Ning Ke said, "Since you are injured, don't ride a horse." After saying this, he turned around and boarded the carriage. Cao Shaoshu smiled and turned back to say a few words to Lu Wu. He then sat in the carriage and said, "Since you are here to welcome me, how can you enter the carriage first?" Ning Ke pointed at the bandages on his body and said, "The Abbey Dean poked 7 holes in me and I've lost all my blood. I don't dare to stand in the cold wind for too long." Cao Shaoshu looked at his face and found that he could no longer find the Akiji from back then. Thinking of the news that had been circulating in Chang, he said, "I thought you were dead." Ning Ke said, "I also thought you were dead." The two looked at each other and smiled. Ning Ke asked, "Why do you think I will die?" Cao Shaoshu said, "I heard that before you killed Xiahou, you said in front of all the civil and military officials that your story is not a story in the books. Since that is the case, you should die no matter what when you meet the Abbey Dean." Ning Ke said, "You left your wife and children to be a hero with hundreds of cavalrymen. I thought this kind of hero would die in the end to perfectly express his tragic emotions. So I thought you were dead." Cao Shaoshu said after a moment of silence, "Many people died." Ning Ke lifted the window and looked back, looking at the heavy horse carriages behind. In the carriages were the corpses of the soldiers of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. They were covered with horse skins. After being blown by the cold winter wind for so many days, the edges of the horse skins had turned blue. You left Chang'an with hundreds of cavalrymen, but only a few dozen were left when you came back. Too many people died. Ning Ke said, "The battle at the eastern border was terrible." Cao Shaoshu said, "The northern battlefront army fought against the Golden Tribe Royal Court on their own. Compared to them, people like us at the eastern border have no right to complain. It's just that the border is empty and the eastern wilderness cavalry is rampaging. The volunteers from all counties have suffered a lot." Ning Ke said, "I thought you would come back earlier." Cao Shaoshu said, "A few days ago I chased after Longqing all the way to Qintang County. Then I found that the problem was solved by you. So I went back to the eastern border first. If the Academy had not defended Chang'an and blocked the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army at the Verdant Canyon for 7 days, the Gushin Commandery and the Northeast Border Military could not have been reorganized. then I would still be there. Ning Ke said, changes in the situation will take time. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the bandages on his body and said, when will you recover? The question sounded simple, maybe just out of concern. But Ning Ke knew that Chao Xiaoshu would not be so simple when he mentioned his injury. I don't know. He knew what Chao Xiaoshu wanted to ask, so he continued, I don't know when my senior brothers and sisters will recover. You don't have to think about it for now. Chao Xiaoshu frowned slightly and asked, why so slow? Ning Ke said, it's not easy to get injured, and it's not easy to recover after being injured. He thought of his senior brothers who were still seriously injured in the back mountain and his third sister who was still sitting in a wheelchair. His expression gradually became dignified. If a Taoism powerhouse sneaked into the Tang Empire's henchmen, it would bring a lot of trouble. Entering from the eastern city gate, they had to pass through the eastern city. When the carriage passed by the old brush pen shop, Ning Ke lifted the curtains and looked at the shop, which was still intact. He thought of what had happened here over the years and could not help but sigh. In the spring of the 13th year of the Tianqi era, Yu and Sang came to Chang'an. Now it is the late winter of the 18th year. In fact, only 5 years have passed, but it feels like decades. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the old brush pen shop and the shops next to it. He thought of the spring rain in the 13th year of the Tianqi era, the killing that night, and his bowl of noodles with fried eggs without eggs. He smiled slightly. Ning Ke looked at him and suddenly said, actually, now that I think about it, we are actually not that familiar. Chao Xiaoshu said, yes, we haven't seen each other too many times. Ning Ke said, don't you think it's a little strange? 20 years ago, when the former emperor was still the crown prince, I met him for the first time in the House of Red Sleeves. We had a fight and then a drink. From then on, I became second brother Chao. A cup of wine is a life and a bowl of noodles is also a life. Chao Xiaoshu said, Chang'an is a very interesting city. Things like this have happened many times, but people living here still enjoy it. So it's not strange at all. Ning Ke thought about it and said, indeed. Chao Xiaoshu did not return to his home in the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Instead, he went directly to the palace. After entering the palace, there was a eunuch to greet them. Chao Xiaoshu followed him into the hall, but Ning Ke did not follow him. He waved his hand to let the eunuch leave and went to the imperial study. His life was full of ups and downs, and there had been many critical turns. Many places were of great significance to him, but the imperial study of the Tang Imperial Palace was undoubtedly a very special place. It was here that he had written the painting, The Flower Blooms on the Other Shore, and that was how he got to know the former emperor. It was here that he talked with Li Yu for a long night, and then he chopped off Li Huiyuan's head in front of the hall the next day. He put the stick in front of the bookshelf and slowly moved to the desk. He ground the ink, laid the paper, and began to write. He kept writing and wrote many pieces of paper. The former emperor liked his handwriting, but he refused to write. Even if he occasionally gave him a few pieces of paper, it was like cutting his own flesh. Now that he thought about it, he should have written a few more to make His Majesty happy. Now he was willing to write, but His Majesty could not see it. It was very quiet in the imperial study. Only the sound of the brush gliding on the paper could be heard. Suddenly, a few extremely majestic reprimands came from somewhere. Ning Ke was slightly absent-minded. The imperial study was very close to the front hall, so the sound must have come from there. At that moment, he even thought that he had heard His Majesty scolding an idiot. As he said in the carriage, he was not familiar with Chao Xiaoshu, but they could live and die together. In fact, he was not familiar with His Majesty, but His Majesty dared to hand Chang'an and the future of the Li royal family to him, and he dared to use his own life to complete this task. Because this was Chang'an and this kind of thing was very common. The trust between him and His Majesty did not start from the flower blooms, but when he heard His Majesty scolding an idiot in the imperial study. He liked to scold people as idiots, so he felt very happy. Ning Ke came to his senses. His Majesty was already dead, and no one in the palace was scolding an idiot. He shook his head and continued to write. Suddenly, his hand that was holding the pen became a little stiff, because he heard the voice coming from the front hall again. This time he heard it clearly. That majestic voice was indeed scolding an idiot. Her Majesty was scolding someone. Ning Ke laughed and felt very happy. In the depths of the palace, there was a huge map marked with complicated lines and annotations. Under the illumination of dozens of arm-thick candles, all the details could be seen clearly. A middle-aged staff officer of the military ministry was holding a thin and long wooden stick and pointing at the map. He was explaining to everyone in the hall, but it was obvious that not many people could listen. The Empress was a little tired. She sat behind the desk and took a cup of tea, slowly drinking. The generals and ministers looked at the empress's gentle appearance. How could they imagine the scene when the Ministry of Revenue had a problem delivering provisions to the Western Expedition Army, and the empress had scolded them as idiots? Qiao Shaoshu stood quietly in the corner, looking at the empress without saying a word. But just like someone in the imperial study, he thought of His Majesty who had scolded him as an idiot in the hall. Some people were still alive and they had returned to their hometowns. Some people had died and they had also returned to their hometowns. Perhaps they had never left. This was good. 2 chapters tomorrow, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:13. The slender wooden stick, painted with red paint, kept moving on the silk military map, as if it was a torch that was about to ignite the map. The fire continued to spread across the Tang's territory. After the great victory on the plateau, the Tang Western Army did not rest or return to help. Instead, they chose to cross the Pamir Mountains and go straight to Chaiyang City. The army led by General Xu Cheng was alone in a foreign country. If they could finally conquer Chaiyang City and capture the Yueluan royal family, it would be of great strategic significance to the current tense situation. Long Qing and the 2,000 cavalrymen were annihilated under the city of Chang'an. The cavalrymen of the wilderness were shocked and fearful. They lacked effective military command, so they could no longer pose much of a threat to the remnants of the northeast border military and the Tang army, which mainly consisted of the volunteer army. The situation at the eastern border was gradually stabilized and had entered the stage of cleanup. The real threats were still in the north and the south. The northern battlefront army had a lot of new soldiers and could even free the Gushan commandery to help the eastern border. However, the Golden Palace had been preparing for decades to invade the east border. The war was still extremely fierce, and the Tang army was always in a passive state of defense. It was impossible to destroy the main force of the Golden Palace's cavalrymen in a short period of time, and then launch a large-scale counterattack. The situation at the Verdant Canyon in the south was also very tense. The main force of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was made up of the South Jin Army, but its real strength was far more than that. Whether the Divine Hall Coalition Army attacked the Verdant Canyon or took a detour to the eastern border, it would bring great pressure to Chang'an, and it was very likely that the war would be reversed again. However, it was very puzzling that the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's attack was much weaker than expected. Looking at the movement of the supplies, it seemed that they did not intend to take a detour to the north. It was very quiet in the palace and the ministers and generals were all very confused. What on earth is the Divine Hall thinking? Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, said, "Is it possible that the Divine Hall still wants to preserve their strength and wait for us and the Golden Palace to suffer losses before they really attack? The Divine Hall wants to negotiate." The Empress pointed to a letter on the table and said. The letter was bright yellow, a color that only the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang imperial family were qualified to use. The Empress's words made everyone in the hall speechless. No one could understand why the West Hill Divine Palace would want to negotiate with them at this moment. The hall became quiet again. No one spoke. Even if the whole world were to attack the Tang Empire, the Tangs were not afraid. But the ministers and generals in the hall were not hot-blooded youths. The most valuable quality they had was calmness. As long as they calmed down, they would be able to clearly understand the difference in power between the Tang Empire and the whole world. Whether it was population, resources, war horses, or territory, the Great Tang was the strongest country in the world, but when compared to the rest of the world, it was undoubtedly at an absolute disadvantage. Especially with the destruction of the northeast border military in the capital of the Yen Kingdom, the blood of the Qinghe County Navy dyed the Great Lake red, and the strength of the Tang army suffered a heavy loss. Although the Academy and the Imperial Court had worked hard to temporarily alleviate the danger of the country's destruction, no one dared to say if the Tang Empire could continue to fight hard under the attack of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army from the north and the south, and no one dared to say how long the Tang Empire could last. From a rational point of view, the West Hill Divine Palace's proposal for peace was undoubtedly what the Tang Empire wanted to see the most. However, under such circumstances, the Tang Empire would definitely have to pay a great price. It was even possible to guess that the coalition army would definitely ask the Tang Empire to cede territory and pay compensation. Since the founding of the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago, the Tang Empire had always won every battle. No one had ever surrendered, let alone made an alliance. Could it be that they could no longer uphold the pride of their ancestors? If they were really forced to negotiate, who would do it? Who would dare to sign the document at the risk of being accused by the Tangs of betraying the country for glory? That was the source of the silence in the hall. The Empress said, the ministers should discuss whether to negotiate or not and how to negotiate. In short, we should draw up a plan as soon as possible. We must be fast because every day we delay will mean one more day of death. In the imperial study, the Empress looked at the calligraphy sections that were not completely dry. She seemed to have thought of something. After a moment of silence, she said, "You heard it all." Ning Ke threw the pen into the water urn and wiped his hands with a piece of paper. He said, "Since the Divine Hall wants to negotiate, then we will accompany them. We can negotiate however we want, but we can't lose." The Empress said, "Since we have the upper hand, if we are not willing to lose, the Divine Hall will definitely not agree. So since we want to negotiate, we must be prepared to lose." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "First of all, we have to understand why the Divine Hall suddenly wants to negotiate. You should know that the main force of the Divine Hall coalition army has not even fought a serious battle until today." The Empress asked, "In your opinion, what is the reason for the Divine Hall's initiative to negotiate?" There was a pot of freshly brewed rock tea on the desk and an exquisite tea set on the bookshelf. Ning Ke took out the tea set and poured 2 small cups of tea. He pushed 1 cup to the Empress and drank the other one. Then he took out everything from the tea set box and put them into the delicately curved and beautiful tea tray. The tea tray was like a sea and could hold countless tea sets. Ning Ke took the largest teapot from the tea tray and said, "Now we can confirm that the Abbey Dean has been crippled. So has the hierarch." He took a thin teaspoon from the tea tray and grabbed a few teacups with one hand. He continued, "The great divine priest of revelation, Master Chi Mei and Yi Su have also been crippled." Finally, he tapped the wooden tube that contained the tea and said, "Lu Bai cut off second brother's right arm and second brother stabbed him in the chest. Lu Bai will not attack again in a short period of time." Looking back at the magnificent war in the past few months, the Tang army had fought bloody battles and ordinary people had risen up. But the real key was the battle between the powerhouses of the academy and Haotian Taoism. The eldest brother had held the Abbey Dean back for 7 days, seriously injured Master Chi Mei in front of the Pamir Mountains and the great divine priest of revelation in front of the Verdant Canyon. The second brother had fought against several peerless powerhouses in front of the Verdant Canyon. He first defeated Yi Su and then injured Lu Bai. He had prevented the West Hill Divine Palace army from entering the Verdant Canyon with his fellow disciples. The third sister had crippled the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and then joined forces with the eldest brother in Chang and to fight the Abbey Dean from the ground to the sky. In addition to the god-stunning array left by the headmaster and the character written by Ning Ke, eldest brother, second brother and third sister had directly changed the direction of the war. The academy has indeed been crippled, but Haotian Taoism has paid a heavier price. I didn't expect that they would want to negotiate. I even feel that the news came a little late. Ning Ke looked at the Empress and said, "Now both sides need time to heal, so you don't have to worry about the academy's attitude. You can negotiate as you like." The Empress said, "Yes, time is in our favor." Ning Ke looked at the dim moon outside the window and said, "Maybe not." The imperial study was silent. He and the Empress looked at the moon. They both knew that the key to the final outcome of the human world was on the moon in the night sky. The Empress looked back at him and asked, "Does the academy have any other opinions?" The senior brothers and senior sisters in the back mountain don't understand the political and military affairs, so they don't have any opinions for me to pass on to you. But I do have something to remind you. What is it? If there is a way, please send a letter to the Pamir Mountains and ask General Shu Cheng to return. Hearing this, the Empress raised her eyebrows and said, "According to the time, the Western Army will attack Chaoyang City and destroy Yueluan City in half a month. How can we ask them to give up now? Chaoyang City must not be entered." Ning Ke thought of the peak under the wilderness and the yellow temples among the peaks. He said, "The academy and Taoism have both suffered great losses. I don't want someone like the chief preaching monk to come to Chang'an." The Empress was from the Devil's Doctrine. Even though she had lived in the palace for a long time, she still knew about the legendary figures in the cultivation world. She understood Ning Ke's fear and agreed. She said, "The military ministry once had a plan to let the Western Army ignore Yueluan Kingdom and enter the wilderness from the Pamir Mountains. They would try to find Chanyu's location when the main force of the Golden Tribe invades the south." Ning Ke thought of the quagmire in the wilderness and said, "This plan is too risky. It's better to give up. Let the Western Army withdraw from the Pamir Mountains and move to the 7 stockade villages." The Empress said, "Let's do it. But if the imperial court agrees to negotiate with the Divine Hall, The Divine Hall will definitely ask the Academy to negotiate. Will you or Mr. First show up then? The Academy can't, at least not me. Ning Ke looked at the scattered teacups on the table and said, if the Academy shows up, we won't regret it in the future. If I sign it, how can I kill people in the future? Qiao Shaoshu had been waiting for Ning Ke in the duty room, waiting for him to leave the palace. It suddenly began to snow in the night sky. Not long after, the square and the surrounding streets were covered with a thin layer of snow, which made the ground slippery. Qiao Shaoshu said, the road is not easy to walk on. Let's have a drink first. Ning Ke nodded. There was a soup shop at the end of the alley. It was already full of people. The easing of the war was quickly reflected in the lives of the people. However, the customers were not as noisy as usual. Seeing that there were more customers, the shop owner moved tables and chairs outside the shop and asked if it was okay. Qiao Shaoshu and Ning Ke did not care. They began to eat the hot mutton giblet soup in the snow. Before he raised his cup, Qiao Shaoshu suddenly asked, what are you going to do with Liu? Ning Ke was putting coriander into Qiao Shaoshu's bowl. Hearing this, he froze for a moment and then returned to normal. He said, that's the Empress or the Imperial Court's business. Qiao Shaoshu said, I'm asking you. Ning Ke put down his chopsticks and looked at him. He said, I remember that your relationship with her is very ordinary. After all, she is His Majesty's most beloved daughter. After saying this, Qiao Shaoshu picked up the dipping sauce and put the fermented bean curd into Ning Ke's bowl. I'm a little tired. I've written this chapter for a long time, but I won't collapse. I'll continue to write the next chapter, but it'll probably be written later. I have to go to work tomorrow to learn how to play asterisk asterisk asterisk. I'll go to bed early. It'll be the same tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:14. This place was not far from the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Some houses had been badly damaged by the battle that day, and some people were repairing them in the snowy night. Ning Ke did not seem to hear Qiao Shaoshu's words. He looked there quietly for a long time and suddenly said, many people died on the street that day. Qiao Shaoshu did not say anything else and started scooping out the mutton offal from the pot. Ning Ke filled his bowl with wine and said, what do you think about the peace talks? Qiao Shaoshu said, it's not convenient for me to speak on important matters in the imperial court. Ning Ke said, the war is stabilizing, but it is not beneficial to the Tang Empire. Too much blood has been shed and we need some time to recover. But since we have not lost, we cannot lose out in the negotiation. Qiao Shaoshu said, let's eat first. The fragrance of the pot filled the air, and the wine was much fainter. After all, it was a time of war. The double steaming that Qiao Shaoshu and Ning Ke liked could not be transported from the north. They ate in silence and did not drink too much. Qiao Shaoshu only spoke when the mutton offal was almost finished and the sauce was almost finished. This war involves too many people. All the Tangs are contributing, but Liu seems to have been forgotten. But you should know that many people in the imperial court have not forgotten her. He looked at Ning Ke and said, the prestige of the academy is too high, and the empress is powerful. Most importantly, because of the invasion, the imperial court and the public are united. Even her most loyal subordinates have chosen to lie low. But if the war ends or temporarily stops, the conflict will erupt again. Ning Ke said, the officials in the imperial court are not really idiots. The empress has shown her means and ability to govern. They have no reason to continue supporting Liu. Qiao Shaoshu said, you seem to have forgotten one thing. Now everyone in the world knows that the empress is a remnant of the devil's doctrine. Although the Tangs have never submitted to the West Hill Divine Palace, their faith in Haotian cannot be washed away in a short time. They still have a natural hatred for the devil's doctrine. Ning Ke said, what are you trying to say? Qiao Shaoshu said, that depends on how the academy and the imperial court are going to deal with her. If everything is peaceful, she will be imprisoned in the princess mansion forever. Ning Ke looked into Qiao Shaoshu's eyes and said, if there are any signs of disturbance, I will kill her in the shortest time possible. Qiao Shaoshu looked at him and said, you used to be very close to her. Everyone in Chang'an knows that. I didn't expect you to be so cold to her. Ning Ke said, as I said, many people have died on this street. Qiao Shaoshu said, I want to see her. Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, why do you want to see her? Qiao Shaoshu said, let's take a look or talk. Although I don't think there's any need to talk, but Ning Ke said, I haven't seen Xiaoman for a long time. Let's go. The night street was quiet. The princess's residence, which used to be filled with guests, seemed especially cold and lonely. Even the commoners who occasionally walked by did not want to look at the nervous door. Ning Ke knew that there were many bodyguards hidden in the surrounding marketplace. He had always thought that Li Yu was an idiot, but this did not mean that the mother and son in the palace would lower their guard against her. He and Qiao Shaoshu walked towards the princess's residence. Light snowflakes fell on the heavy gate. The inside of the courtyard was quiet and there were no lights. It looked like a tomb. After the Xianwei general's mansion was executed, it also looked like a tomb. When Ning Ke had just arrived in Chang'an, he had visited it several times. He knew that this was what a dilapidated mansion should look like, so he did not find it strange. He suddenly stopped and the walking stick under his armpit fell into the snow. Qiao Shaoshu also stopped. In the seemingly normal night they felt that something was wrong at the same time. They heard the faint sound of breathing coming from the ancient trees behind the wall. From the frequency of their breathing, they could tell that those people were a little nervous. Ning Ke looked up at the falling snow. The snowflakes fell slowly and looked beautiful, but he was not actually looking at the snow. His eyes brushed past the branches on the wall. Between the branches, he saw the sharp and cold arrowheads. It's a crossbow. He looked at Qiao Shaoshu and said with a smile, "It seems to be a Shenhou crossbow." Hearing the words Shenhou crossbow, Qiao Shaoshu also laughed. A few years ago he and Ning Ke walked into the Spring Breeze Pavilion and killed countless people in the night rain. When they opened the door of the Qiao mansion they saw a Shenhou crossbow. There was no rain tonight but there was snow. After so many years they were once again targeted by a Shenhou crossbow. Their expressions were not as solemn as before. Instead they laughed because they were no longer the same as before. Qiao Shaoshu was no longer the king of Jianghu. He had entered the knowing destiny state by the lake in the imperial palace. He could also escape from Liu Bai's sword. He already had a place in the ranks of the strongest cultivators in the human world. Ning Ke had changed the most. Although the old brush pen shop was still his, he no longer sold calligraphy for a living. The once abject youth from the border town was now a person from the academy who had entered the human world. Not to mention a few Shenhou crossbows, even if there were hundreds of heavy cavalry rushing towards them from the other end of the street, neither Qiao Shaoshu nor Ning Ke would be moved. They were very strong and even stronger when they stood together. They had seen it in the night rain in the Spring Breeze Pavilion years ago, or in the night snow in front of the princess's mansion a few years later. "I just want to know where they are from now," Ning Ke said. Qiao Shaoshu said, "They should be the blood cloaks from the Gushin commandery. They are the most elite subordinates of the Hua family in the army. You may not know, but Hua Shanyue has already returned to Chang'an from the front line." Ning Ke said, "What is love in the world? It can turn people into idiots." Walking into the princess's mansion, it was still pitch black. Only the lights from other mansions outside the walls could be seen. With the light of the snow, they could barely see the old path between the fallen flowers. Ning Ke had been to the princess's mansion many times. He walked directly in with Qiao Shaoshu, passing through the stone gate and the frozen surface of the lake. They saw the bean-like light on the lakeside balcony. There were many heavy gauze curtains on the balcony. The light was very dim and the woman sitting there looked very lonely. It was winter and no one could understand why she was sitting there in the cold wind. Ning Ke lifted the gauze curtain and looked at Li Yu. He said, "It seems that your mood has been quite good recently. It makes sense. As long as you have a thought in your heart, you can always get through the hard days." Li Yu was obviously thinner but she was still beautiful. She ignored Ning Ke and bowed to Qiao Shaoshu who was beside him. She said, "Thank you, second Uncle Qiao, for remembering me." Qiao Shaoshu shook his head and did not speak. Ning Ke walked to her with the help of his walking stick. He rubbed the wick with his fingers to make the oil lamp brighter. He looked at Li Yu and said, "I used to call you an idiot behind your back. That's because I have too high expectations for you. In fact, you are not that stupid. Then you should be very clear that under the current situation, you can either stay in the mansion or die. The Tang Empire does not give you the right to choose a third path." Li Yu did not say a word and only looked at him quietly. Ning Ke said, "Why do you do such a stupid thing?" Hearing this, Li Yu laughed. Her laugh was a little sad. "Being imprisoned to death or being killed directly doesn't make much difference to me now. I would rather choose the latter. Moreover, I can't let Xiao Man live with me in this tomb for the rest of his life." These are all excuses. Ning Ke's tone was very calm. This calmness was even colder than the snow on the lake. "If you are worried about Xiao Man, you can directly send someone to tell me. For the sake of our old friendship, I will not let him waste his life here no matter what. But you didn't because you still want to get out. And no matter what, I will not let you leave this princess mansion. The cold night wind blew up the gauze curtain and fell on Li Yu's body. She felt a little cold. Chao Xiaoshu stood at the side in silence. Li Yu looked at Ning Ke and suddenly said, "Do you hate me so much?" Ning Ke said, "It has nothing to do with love or hate. You know that I have always only considered interests." After saying this, he looked around the balcony and said, "Come out." It was quiet. After a while, sounds came from all around the balcony and below. More than 10 men in cloaks walked out. Hua Shangyue walked at the front, holding Xiaoman's hand. These people looked weathered and solemn. They were obviously soldiers. What surprised Ning Ke was that their cloaks were all white, unlike the blood cloaks that Chao Xiaoshu had mentioned. Until a gust of wind blew up the soldiers' cloaks, revealing the blood-red lining. Xiaoman of course knew Ning Quebec. Seeing him standing in front of her mother, she subconsciously wanted to call out to him. But she suddenly realized that the atmosphere on the balcony was a little strange. Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. Then he looked at Hua Shangyue and his smile gradually faded. He did not know how this person and the Tang elites in blood cloaks had entered the princess mansion, but he knew what they wanted to do. And that was definitely something that he could not allow to happen. "I can't believe that an idiot who is blinded by emotions can bring you out of Chang'an. I really don't know if I should be disappointed in you or proud of my judgment back then." Ning Ke looked at Hua Shangyue, but this sentence was directed at Li Yu. Li Yu said, "I don't believe that he can bring me out of Chang'an. But since he is here, I can't just chase him away. You have to know that he is the first guest that has come to the mansion these days." Ning Ke said to Hua Shangyue, "You are now the supervisor of 3 states, only 3 levels away from becoming a general. I heard that you have made a lot of achievements in the northern front, but they are all going to disappear tonight. Do you regret it?" Hua Shangyue looked at the crutch under his armpit and said, "Some things have to be tried before you know if you will regret it. I heard that you are seriously injured. Perhaps you are the one who will regret meeting me at this time." Ning Ke pointed at Chao Xiaoshu. Hua Shangyue said, "I heard that gang leader Chao is also seriously injured. Ordinary people can't tell that you cultivators are injured. But according to the military, you are as weak as rabbits." Ning Ke looked at him and the dozen blood cloaks and said, "Wishful thinking indeed makes one crazy." Hua Shangyue said, "There are 30 Shinho crossbows pointing at you in the night. Of course I can think. 2 chapters tomorrow as well. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 8:15. Ning Ke held the crutch and looked at Hua Shangyue. Half of his body weight was on the crutch. Because of his posture, he looked very serious, as if he wanted to see through the restlessness between Hua Shanyue's eyebrows. Hua Shanyue felt a dull pain between his eyebrows. He felt that Ning Ke's eyes were like 2 sharp knives, so he took a step to the side while holding Xiaoman's hand. He moved away from the darkness outside the terrace and shielded Li Yu, who was sitting behind the desk, behind him. He had said that there were 30 Shinho crossbows in the darkness, and it was not a lie. As he moved aside, a shrill sound suddenly broke out in the quiet garden. Dozens of crossbow bolts shot out from the trees beside the courtyard wall like lightning, aiming at Ning Ke on the terrace. The snowflakes falling in the garden were sparse, but at this time it seemed to suddenly become denser, and there was a strange power attached to it, forming countless sharp lines. The sharp arrowheads of the crossbow bolts, after passing through the snowflakes, broke and fell as if their heads had been cut off by a sharp knife. Then the bolts broke into pieces and scattered in the air. Dozens of crossbow bolts could not pass through the wind and snow. They turned into countless pieces, scattered with the wind and snow, and then slowly fell down, no different from the dead branches falling from the tree. The fragments of the crossbow bolts fell on the thin snow, making a messy sound. The people inside and outside the terrace had long been shocked by the scene, and they did not come to themselves until they heard the sound. With 2 shouts, several Tang soldiers pulled out their swords from their waists and slashed at Ning Ke's head. Ning Ke leaned on the crutch and did not even look at the swords, but still looked at Hua Shangyue quietly. Hua Shangyue felt the stabbing pain between his eyebrows getting worse, and his body and mind were cold. Several Tang soldiers pulled out their swords and slashed down. But before they could reach Ning Ke, the hard swords broke into 2 with a crisp sound, and then their hands holding the hilts were broken. 2 very clear cuts appeared on their chests and abdomens. Blood slowly seeped out from the 2 cuts and gradually spread. The wounds gradually separated into 2 sides, becoming more and more horrible. Ning Ke did not draw out his knife, but slashed the Tang soldiers twice. The knife wounds were only in front of them, but the knife intent seeped into their backs. The cloaks behind the Tang soldiers were cut off by the wind and fell to the ground. Half of the cloak rolled up when it fell to the ground, revealing the bright red side. It looked like a pool of blood. The Tang soldiers knelt in the pool of blood and could no longer stand up. Hua Shanyue's pupils shrank slightly, but his expression remained calm. He looked at Ning Ke and asked, "Is this the character?" Ning Ke leaned on his crutch and looked at him, still silent. Then he slowly straightened his body, his right hand loosened the crossbar under the crutch, as if preparing to draw a knife or write something. The previous two scenes had already shown the unimaginable gap in strength between the two sides. Seeing Ning Ke's actions, everyone knew what he was going to do next. At this moment, Chao Xiaoshu's hand landed on Ning Ke's shoulder. Ning Ke wanted to hear an explanation. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the Tang soldiers and asked, "Have you just come back from the front?" It was very quiet on the terrace. No one answered his question because they did not know why he asked it. Ning Ke knew that Chao Xiaoshu's question was for him. He looked at the weathered faces of the Tang soldiers, and after a moment of silence, his right hand grasped the crutch again and leaned on it. He looked at Hua Shanyue and said, "No matter how you think about it, it's just wishful thinking." Hua Shanyue looked at his subordinates lying in a pool of blood beside him and was silent for a long time. Then, he withdrew his right hand that had been covering Buchi's eyes. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Sometimes it's ridiculous to think about it. But even if you kill me, you can't stop me from thinking about it." When he said this, the expression on his face was very complicated. There was some regret, some self-mockery and some unwillingness on his face. In order to save Li Yu and leave Chang'an, he had made very careful arrangements. However, who would have thought that on this snowy night, the princess mansion, which had been deserted for many days, would actually welcome two guests, Ning Ke and Chao Xiaoshu. The princess mansion, which had been deserted for a long time, became lively again tonight. The bodyguard office and the Chang'an local government had sent a lot of people to the mansion. The street in front of the mansion was brightly lit by torches. Many people gathered on both ends of the street, looking at the movement over there and talking about it. Basically, there were no good words. The war was tense and the Tang people were still fighting in the front line. But those high officials and nobles still caused so much trouble in Chang'an City. No one would show any sympathy to the losers. Hua Shanyue and more than 50 Tang soldiers from the Gushan commandery were disarmed and taken out of the princess mansion. What awaited them was the prison of the military ministry. As for what price they would eventually pay, no one knew yet. In hindsight, this rescue seemed to be too wishful thinking. It was not a problem to be judged as crazy. But in fact, Hua Shanyue was worthy of being the leader of the young and vigorous faction of the Tang army. He was not as incompetent as he had shown in this plan. His plan could be said to be perfect. As soon as he returned to Chang'an, he took action with lightning speed. He was prepared for every step. As long as he could take Li Yu out of the princess mansion, neither the city patrol office nor the bodyguard office could stop them from leaving Chang'an. And if he really took Li Yu back to the Gushan commandery, who knew what would happen to the Tang Empire in the future? It was a pity that he was so unlucky. No one expected that Chao Xiaoshu would go to see Li Yu. What was even more unexpected was that Ning Ke followed him to the princess mansion. The bustling and discussions on the street outside the mansion did not affect the peace in the depths of the mansion. Ning Ke said to Chao Xiaoshu, "Do you still want to talk to her now?" After a moment of silence, Chao Xiaoshu said, "I saw her. Then there is no need to talk. Then wait for me for a while." Ning Ke said, "I suddenly have something to talk to her about." The terrace was quiet, and the accumulated snow on the lake made it even colder. Xiaoman was taken to sleep by the servant woman. However, he did not know if he could fall asleep after seeing such a bloody scene. Ning Ke put down his crutch and sat by the table with some difficulty. He picked up the cup of cold tea in front of Li Yu and took 2 sips to moisten his throat. Then he said, "Actually, I really don't want to call you an idiot anymore." Li Yu looked at the cup of tea and said, "Are you tired of it?" Ning Ke said, "Staying quietly in this garden, even though the scenery is a little monotonous, it is better than dying. You should understand this. Why don't you give up?" I said that I would rather choose the latter than being killed. Moreover, Hua Shanyue risked his life to save me. What else can I do? Do you want me to tell you? Li Yu looked at him and said with slight mockery, "That night in the imperial study, you told me that I would slowly see your coldness. Then you killed Huiyuan in the palace. Now is it time for you to show your coldness? If you want to kill me, you'd better be direct. Don't use my idiocy as an excuse." Ning Ke said, "I want to call you an idiot not because of what happened tonight, but because you still seem to be very confident that you will not be killed by me after what happened tonight. Li Yu said, if you really want to kill me, you won't stay here and say these words to me. Ning Ke shook his head and said, it is very easy to kill you. It is indeed more troublesome not to kill you, but it is not the kind of trouble you think it is. Li Yu frowned slightly but did not speak. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful face and seemed to see the maidservant who held Xiaoman and listened to his fairy tales beside the bonfire many years ago. He said, it seems that you have thought through a lot of things these days. Li Yu still did not speak. Ning Ke said, there is nothing special in this world. Whether it is Xiaoman's background or your influence on the grassland, it will not affect the decision of Her Majesty and I. Li Yu stared at his eyes and her hands and her sleeves trembled slightly. She could imagine that Ning Ke could see through her thoughts and support, but she did not expect that Ning Ke would still be so cold after knowing all this. Now that the whole world was against the Tang Empire, other than the West Hill Divine Palace, the real threat to the Tang Empire was the cavalry of the Golden Palace invading from the north. If the Tang Empire wanted to completely eliminate the threat from the north, Xiaoman's background and her influence in the Golden Palace were very important. It was because of these reasons that she was sure that the Academy and the Imperial Court would keep her. In fact, you are not wrong. But the Academy and the Imperial Court may not do this, especially when I find that you want to use these as bargaining chips. Ning Ke looked at her and said, even if Butcher Li is dead, I can still eat pigs. The Academy is still powerful and invincible even if the headmaster is gone. I have long planned for the wilderness that the Golden Palace owns. It would be better if I have your help. Even without you, I will still win in the end. Li Yu looked at him and raised her eyebrows. Even if many people die? Ning Ke said, as long as it is not the Tangs who die. Li Yu thought of a possibility and her expression changed slightly. She looked a little lonely. She said, it seems that the Tang Empire really does not need me in Xiaoman. Did you already make arrangements before the war? Ning Ke did not expect that she could guess his plans for the Golden Palace with just a few words. He said, it seems that you are indeed not an idiot in these aspects. Li Yu said self-deprecatingly, then it means that I am still an idiot in other aspects. Ning Ke said, yes. The street in front of the princess's residence gradually became quiet after the troops and horses left. The snow on the street that had been trampled into dirty water could not be restored to its clean and white appearance for a while. Ning Ke and Qiao Shaoshu walked on the street. The soles of their boots stepped on the snow, making splashing sounds. To kill or not to kill, this is a problem that you have to solve eventually. Qiao Shaoshu said, after all, she is the most beloved daughter of His Majesty. It is best not to kill her if possible. The next chapter, before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:16. The quiet street reverberated with the sound of boots stepping on the snow. It sounded monotonous, as if someone was hitting the old bell in the palace with his palm. It was painful to hear the low hum. The crutch under Ning Ke's armpit fell rhythmically on the snow with his footsteps, but did not make any sound. After hearing what Qiao Shaoshu said, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, the Academy does not meddle in politics. It is up to the Empress to decide whether to kill her or not. If the Academy did not meddle in politics, the Tang Empire would have perished months ago. The Academy did not meddle in politics, so the second statement was also empty talk. Qiao Shaoshu said, should I kill Hua Shangyue? Ning Ke said, I want to. Qiao Shaoshu said, the Hua family is a prominent family in Hebei. They are different from the other families in Qinghe County. They have always been loyal to the Tang Empire and have a strong foundation in the army and the court. Especially the 5 camps in Gushin Commandery, they have always been managed by them. In fact, they are still doing so now. Ning Ke said, are you telling me all this to tell me that Hua Shangyue is not easy to kill? Qiao Shaoshu said, you know this too. Otherwise, you would have done it even if I had stopped you. Ning Ke said, I am thinking if I want to kill Hua Shangyue, should I kill the entire Hua family? Although this answer is a little cruel, it is not unexpected. Qiao Shaoshu said, but there are so many people in the court that you cannot kill. You cannot kill all the officials who support Li Yu, because that would be equivalent to the Tang Empire's destruction. However, once the war subsides, these people will definitely worry that the Empress or the Academy will purge them. So the conflict will continue. Even if Hua Shangyue did not die tonight, similar things will happen in the future. Ning Ke said, I will find a suitable way to deal with it. The two did not continue discussing this matter. After all, the matter or the way to deal with it had an indelible sense of gloom. It was not too harmonious with the snow-white clean street and the hot-bloodedness of these days. Chao Xiaoshu did not like it, and Ning Kai did not want to talk about it at this moment. The two walked in silence, and it did not take long before they arrived at the second street of Spring Breeze Pavilion in the eastern city. Walking into the Chao mansion, Ning Kai greeted Old Master Chao and was then pulled to the side yard by Shangguan Yangyu. Looking at the wretched face of the governor, he slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "Why did they react so quickly?" Shangguan Yangyu stroked his goatee. He looked calm, but his hands were shaking so hard that he almost pulled out his beard. He said, "It's not easy for us to have peace for 2 days. If we don't handle this well, there will be big trouble. What should we do?" Ning Kai looked at him and asked. Shangguan Yangyu panicked under his gaze and said, "If you say it's good, then it's good." Ning Kai smiled and said, "Who found you?" Shangguan Yangyu said, "Neither the Grand Secretary nor the ministers dare to intervene in this matter. Who else could it be? The Chancellor of the Supreme Court is waiting at my house right now." Through the prefectural magistrate's explanation, Ning Kai knew that the Chancellor of the Supreme Judiciary was related to the Hua family by marriage. He thought about it and asked, "What does the Empress mean?" Shangguan Yangyu said, "The Empress asked Mr. 13 to handle this matter." Then he looked around to make sure that no one was spying on them. He said in a low voice, "The young and old of the Hua family are kneeling in front of the palace gate. It seems that they will run until tomorrow morning." "What's the point of kneeling now?" Ning Kai said. He understood the meaning of the imperial court. Hua Shanyue's behavior was obviously not approved by the family. At this moment, everyone wanted to keep calm and united. The only place that was qualified to handle this matter and calm the storm was the academy. In other words, it was him. Ning Kai thought of the northern battlefront army officers and soldiers who ambushed the Empress caravan in the northern military camp. He said, "Send the blood cloaks involved to General Su Qi, tell him that I sent them there. Do it according to the previous rule. 10 heads will atone for their crimes. Go back and tell the Chancellor of the Supreme Judiciary that if the war stops, let the Hua family be ready to hand over the military power." Understood. Shangguan Yangyu was thrown out by the Empress to be the middleman, but he did not want to offend the princess's faction too much. After hearing Ning Kai's suggestion, he finally felt relieved and asked, "What about Hua Shanyue?" Ning Kai said, "Throw him over as well." Shangguan Yangyu was finally completely relieved. He was most worried that Ning Kai would insist on killing Hua Shanyue. After all, even the Empress thought that Hua Shanyue could not die at this time. Shangguan Yangyu left the Chao mansion. Ning Kai stood alone in the side courtyard and gently stroked the rough surface of his crutch. Thinking about what happened tonight, he felt that something was wrong. A cough sounded from behind the wintersweet bushes. Old Master Chao walked out. Ning Kai was ready to help him. Old Master Chao waved his hand and said, "You are a dead cripple now. You still want to help me?" Ning Kai smiled and suddenly asked, "Second uncle, what do you think of this matter?" Old Master Chao said, "Why do you ask an old man like me for important matters in the imperial court?" Ning Kai said, "Even the Abbey Dean has to ask you, let alone me." Old Master Chao said, "Tell me." Ning Kai said, "I always feel that it is not right to handle it this way." Old Master Chao said, "Because you are retreating." Ning Kai said thoughtfully, "Yes, I am not used to retreating in the face of worldly affairs." Old Master Chao looked at him and said, "If you want to ask about heaven's way, you should not care about worldly affairs." Ning Kai asked, "So what if worldly affairs always bother you?" Old Master Chao said, "What did you do when the Abbey Dean was in front of you?" There were many braziers in the parlor of the Chao mansion. It was as warm as spring. The disciples of the Fish Dragon gang had suffered heavy casualties in the past few days. The atmosphere in the gang was naturally gloomy. Today Chao Xiaoshu and Lu Vi had returned. Everyone gathered at the Chao mansion but did not drink too much. Ning Kai and Chi For finished talking about the renovation of the house by the Yanming Lake and glanced at the other side of the table. Chen Lu was drinking hot tea. He did not like to drink because he thought that alcohol was not good for thinking. Ning Kai said that he drank too much soup and went out of the parlor to relieve himself. Not long after, Chen Lu also came out. "You are familiar with the military. How is your relationship with the Northern Army?" Ning Kai looked at Chen Lu and asked. The bright yellow light shone through the window paper and fell on Chen Lu, leaving a large shadow on his face. After the night at Spring Breeze Pavilion, the relationship between the Fish Dragon gang and the military was very close. Chen Lu knew that he could not hide anything in this regard, so he said softly, "We can talk." Ning Kai said, "Tell them that I want Hua Shanyue dead." Chen Lu was silent for a long time and then nodded. His nodding movement was very small. If Ning Ke had not stared at him, he would not have noticed it. The two returned to the parlor. Chow Xiaoshu looked at the two and said, "Eat quickly, the meat is almost rotten. There is something wrong with my brain today. I hope it will be better tomorrow." 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. At that time I thought I had figured it out. However, after returning to the Great River, I sat by the ink lake and looked at the reflection on the water and the flowing clouds in the blue sky. I found that the so-called understanding was just an escape. I was always a little unwilling. This is greed. Because you once said that you like me and I still like you. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said, "I like you too." Then he looked at the bamboo outside the window and thought of that long night when he cursed the heavens and the earth by the snow lake. He said, "That day she ran away but she didn't run far so I could catch her. This time she ran to the sky, too far to come back so I can't do anything about it." There seemed to be no relationship between these words, but Mo Shanshan understood. Her long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and there was no sadness on her white face, only calmness. "I like you and you like me. That's good." She looked at Ning Ke and said, "As for other greed, it might have been possible in the past but probably not now. I won't feel sad because this is probably God's will." She poured a cup of wine and slowly pushed it in front of Ning Quebec. Then she looked at the night sky outside the window and said with a smile, "Because she is God." Ning Ke looked at her breathtakingly beautiful face and drank the wine in his cup as a sign of respect. Chang'an City was getting colder and colder and the winter was getting colder and colder. Time passed slowly and unstoppably. Quietly the 18th year of Tianqi came to an end. The little emperor had not officially ascended the throne, and the Tang Empire was in the hands of the empress. It would probably take some time before the new year was changed. The war had not completely stopped, and the Tang Empire was still under great pressure. No one knew how many people had died, but the new year had to be celebrated and it would be more lively. Ning Ke spent the new year in the academy. His senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain were injured, disabled, or recovering. The New Year's Eve dinner fell on Mo Shanshan and Tang Xiaotang, with the help of the little attendant. Although the dinner was not ready until the moon climbed up to the top of the mountain, they finally had a hot meal. Everyone drank a lot of wine that night and toasted to the bright moon several times. If the headmaster had the time to drink the wine toasted by his disciples, he would probably be drunk. It was peaceful and warm as if everything had happened yesterday. But in fact, everyone felt that the back of the mountain of the academy was missing something important. Perhaps it was the teacher who liked to be a food connoisseur, or perhaps it was Sang Sang who had been in charge of cooking for the past few years. At the turn of the new year, the situation in the world had changed a lot. Because of the cold weather, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court stopped their crazy attack and entered a temporary truce with the Tang army. The Golden Tribe Royal Court set up camp in Kaiping of the 7 stockade villages, while the Tang army stuck to the Xiangwan plain and did not retreat. The king of the Yueluan kingdom, the commander of the army, and other important figures were all killed by eldest brother. The main force of the army was annihilated by the Tang Western Army in front of the Pamir Mountains. The Western Army took the opportunity to break through the Pamir Mountains and directly attacked Chaoyang City, intending to destroy the country. They broke through 17 cities along the way, and only received an urgent letter from Chang'an when they reached the north of Chaoyang City. After reading the letter signed by the Imperial Court and the Academy, General Xu Qing thought for a while, and then forcibly ordered the army to retreat, despite the shock and opposition of his generals. When the Tang Western Army retreated from Chaoyang City, smoke and dust rose into the sky. The people of the Yueluan kingdom could not believe their eyes. When they were sure that the Tang army would not attack the city again, the entire Chaoyang city became a sea of welcome. Countless people of the Yueluan kingdom wept bitterly, and then began to splash water to celebrate. On the way back, the Tang Western Army was even sent off by the people of the Yueluan kingdom. From time to time, the gentry, people, and monks of the Yueluan kingdom would bring the army provisions, water, and eggs dyed red. The generals of the Western Army, who had firmly opposed the retreat at first, finally realized that the perennial warmth of the country could not be judged by ordinary logic. It was indeed meaningless to conquer them. The most shocking change happened at the Verdant Canyon. For some reason, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, which claimed to have hundreds of thousands of people, began to retreat to the south. They did not try to break through the Verdant Canyon, nor did they intend to take a detour to the north. Instead, they retreated to Qinghe Prefecture and waited silently for something. The southern army of the Tang Empire rushed thousands of miles to the verdant canyon, abandoning countless supplies along the way. Most of the soldiers even threw their armor deep into the mountains. They were exhausted and held on by sheer willpower. Because of the retreat of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, they finally had a precious chance to breathe. However, the arrival of happiness was so sudden that neither the generals of the Southern Army nor Chang understood what had happened. The most powerful coalition army of the Divine Halls had done nothing in this worldwide war against the Tang Empire. To be more precise, they had not played any role and had retreated just like that. Why on earth was that? The Tangs could not understand, and the people of the South Jin Kingdom could not understand, especially the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom, who had been immersed in extreme grief because of the death of his son. It was impossible for him to understand, so he was very angry. Then he died of anger. After the new year, the news of the death of the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom spread throughout the world. According to the official statement of the South Jin Kingdom, the great Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom had died of a sudden illness because he had been working too hard on state affairs. He had been reading memorials continuously for 3 days and 2 nights without sleep. The Imperial Center Administration of the Tang Empire had found some other statements in the south. Although they could only confirm some fragments, it was enough for the people in Chang'an to deduce what had happened. On the day before his death, the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was furious because of the retreat of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. He summoned the generals of the South Jin Kingdom into the palace and scolded them. He even scolded the dead commander-in-chief by Haixin. However, the emperor still could not be happy. He ordered the sword Garrett to send someone to the palace to explain why the Battle of the Verdant Canyon had turned out this way. The Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, was recuperating. With his status, he naturally would not go to the palace to explain. The sword Garrett randomly sent a disciple to the palace. That disciple was called Liu Yiqing. Then, there was no then. The death of the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was probably just a simple record in the history books. It was not much different from the gloomy bloodstains in the countless palaces in history. However, in the eyes of those who were observant, the death of the Emperor was a very important matter, because it represented a fundamental change in the power structure of the human world. Cultivators did not have enough power to influence the imperial power in the secular world. Many details in the war against the Tang Empire had already proved this. Whether it was the cultivators of the Yen Kingdom, the array tactical masters and sword masters of the Tang army, or the priests of the Golden Tribe royal court, they were not much different from ordinary people in front of the charge of thousands of cavalry and the rain of arrows. It was also this war that proved another possibility. The real powerhouses at the peak of the knowing destiny state could change the color of rivers and mountains once they showed their power. For example, the 3 people who fought in the Verdant Canyon battle. The solemn South Jin Kingdom palace seemed so weak and vulnerable in front of the sword of a blind man. This had something to do with the power of the sword Garrett, but in fact, it proved a fact. The headmaster left the human world and went to heaven. From that day on, the human world was no longer the human world of the past. This was the so-called heavenly earth. The next chapter is almost finished. It will be updated soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 8:18. Powerful cultivators like Liu Bai, Jun Mo, and Yi Su had always existed. The world 1,000 years ago was a world of powerful cultivators. Whether royal or ordinary people, they were just pitiful people struggling in the cracks. However, there was a sage every 1,000 years. As the headmaster built the Tang Empire, the West Hill Divine Palace made corresponding changes, and the situation changed fundamentally. With the 2 mountains of the Academy and the West Hill Divine Palace, even the strongest cultivator had to obey the rules of the secular world. Unless they could surpass the 5 states, they would find that there was always a blue sky above their heads, making it impossible for them to get out. Now that the headmaster had ascended to heaven, heaven did not seem to care about the human world anymore. The West Hill Divine Palace had suffered great losses in the war, and the deterrence of the 2 mountains and the blue sky was weakening. Under such circumstances, powerful cultivators could naturally breathe more fresh air, not to mention people like Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, who could surpass the 5 states at any time if he wanted to. Therefore, the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom died quietly. It was a natural thing because he did not understand the changes in the world. The more powerful the person, the more freedom they had. Once they had the ability to control this freedom over the human world would fall into chaos, just like the barbaric years before the Tang Empire. Now it depended on whether a visiting professor of the Divine Hall like Liu Bai still had enough respect for Haotian Taoism. At the same time, it depended on whether the people in the academy could open an umbrella for the people like the headmaster. Judging from the current situation, the West Hill Divine Palace had been weakened the most in this war. However, the Haotian Taoism sect had ruled the world for countless years, and its foundation was unimaginable. No one knew if there was a hermit in the knowing destiny state hiding in a simple Taoist temple on a mountain. Other than Master Chi Mei, who was seriously injured, the power of the Buddhism sect was not affected much. Neither Qin Yin, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, nor the soldier monks of the Shenkong temple joined the war. It was because of the Buddhism sect's own philosophy that they would not take the initiative. Other than Taoism and Buddhism sect, the most powerful force in the world was the Golden Palace. Other than the wolf-like cavalry, the nation master and the dozen high priests were enough to deter most cultivators. The sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom had already begun to show its edge. The aristocratic families who had been keeping a low profile for many years now dared to show their faces in this precarious time. The secular world, which had been controlled by the three unknown lands for countless years, was bound to become chaotic. No one knew what would happen in the end. If they wanted to see the future of the human world clearly, all the cultivation sects had to keep an eye on the academy in the south of Chang'an City. No matter how silent the academy was now, it was still the academy. In the future, it will be the world of the strong cultivators. Unless the headmaster of the academy returns to the human world, or the West Hill Divine Palace recovers its power in the shortest time possible, there will be chaos for a while. Ning Ke looked into the carriage through the green curtain and said, "You should be soberly aware of this now. Those ministers should also be aware of this and learn to accept reality." In the new year, the situation in Chang'an was chaotic and complicated. When the external pressure exerted on the Tang Empire by the West Hill Divine Palace coalition army and the cavalry of the Golden Palace temporarily disappeared, some hidden problems gradually surfaced in the Tang Empire's seemingly united court. Especially a few days ago when the news of Hua Shanyue's death came from the front line, the entire Chang'an city was shaken. Hua Shanyue was a descendant of an aristocratic family. He had become the military supervisor of the 3 states of the Gushan Commandery a few years ago. He was very powerful in the army and had a high status. He was expected to become a future general of the Tang Empire. In the Tang Empire's army, dying in battle was not just a tragedy for ordinary soldiers. It was common for generals to die on the battlefield. Generals of a higher rank than Hua Shanyue had been killed by the enemy's arrows countless times in the Tang Empire's thousands of years of history. Logically speaking, the news of Hua Shanyue's death would definitely cause sorrow and regret in the court, but not such a violent shock. But that was not the case. As the military supervisor of the 3 states, Hua Shanyue did not need to take the lead. At least, he did not need to lead his subordinates into the dangerous battlefield when the war was gradually calming down. Most importantly, everyone knew the reason why Hua Shanyue was sent to the northern battlefront army by the academy. Therefore, the news of Hua Shanyue's death ignited the anger of the princess's faction in a very short time. After the court meeting the day before yesterday, the white-haired minister of the Ministry of Rights shouted at the palace wall with tears streaming down his face, "Even if he is guilty, how can he die without a trial? Your Majesty, how can you face His Majesty?" The minister of the Ministry of Rights was a bigwig of the princess's faction. There were many people like him in the court. Moreover, the Hua family was an aristocratic family of the Tang Empire and had many close disciples and old friends. If the Empress and the Academy chose to purge the power in the court at this time, it would definitely hurt people's hearts. But if they did not hurt people's hearts, they would inevitably be in chaos. The fact that the Empress was the saintess of the diabolism was still not accepted by many people in the Tang Empire. The most dangerous thing was that if the chaos of the people's hearts was linked to the accusation of the Tang imperial family by Haotian Taoism, it would definitely bring great trouble to the Tang Empire. The West Hill Divine Palace had not launched an attack on public opinion in this regard, but everyone knew that it was only a temporary calm. There were many horse carriages parked in front of the House of Red Sleeves, but it was very quiet inside the building. There was no sound of musical instruments, music, or applause after a dance. There were more than 10 tables in the hall. The people sitting behind the tables were all important figures in the princess's faction. Some of them looked angry, some were thoughtful, and some were calm and silent. No matter what emotions they were feeling, they looked at the table in front of them coldly. The table was placed in front of them, some distance away from the other tables. Ning Ke sat behind the table and quietly looked at the ministers in front of him with different expressions. He was Mr. 13 of the academy, and no one in the Tang Empire dared to disrespect him. But at this time no one paid attention to him, so he seemed very lonely. Ning Ke was very used to this kind of loneliness, whether it was in Min Mountain or in the wilderness. He raised the flagon and filled the cup in front of him. He looked at the ministers in front of him and said, "I know what you are thinking. You are not reconciled, or you are not convinced, or you are suspicious of the Empress, or you think that I have done something inappropriate." The ministers slightly raised their eyebrows and thought, "Do you really dare to admit it?" Ning Ke raised his cup and said, "But I will not explain to you because I don't need to. The law of the Tang Empire is above, and rules must be obeyed. When the Tang army can go south from the Verdant Canyon, recover the Qinghe River, or go deep into the wilderness and burn the golden tent, we will talk about what happened today." A minister said, "Then why did Mr. 13 ask us to come here today?" Ning Ke said, "I want you to shut up." The minister could not restrain his anger and scolded, "Why do you want us to shut up?" Ning Ke said, "Spreading rumors without evidence is a false accusation. At this time, doing such a thing is tantamount to treason. You should know the seriousness of the matter. If you don't shut up, what do you want to do?" "We want to see Her Highness." "No." Ning Ke said, "Her Highness is a criminal and no one can see her. If you insist, then tomorrow we will start the trial of Her Highness for tampering with the edict of the late Emperor." "Then let's start the trial." The silent minister of the Ministry of Rights finally spoke. His voice was a little tired and sad. He said, "At least I can't watch Her Highness die quietly like General Hua." Ning Ke looked at the wine cup in his hand and was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Then let's see her." As he said this, the bead curtain behind him moved slightly and made a clear and melodious sound. Li Yu, who was wearing a palace dress, walked slowly into the hall accompanied by 2 handmaidens. There was a sudden sound of bowls and plates in the building. More than 10 ministers stood up and looked at Li Yu with shock and excitement. After a while they came to their senses and bowed to her. This was the first time since the incident that Li Yu had left the princess' residence. It was also the first time these people in the court had seen her. At this moment, seeing that Her Highness was in good spirits even though she was a little thin, the ministers finally calmed down. Li Yu looked at these ministers and thought about how these people still did not abandon her even in this situation. She could not help but feel touched. She bowed and said, "Thank you everyone." The ministers said in unison, "We dare not." Ning Ke held the wine cup and looked at it as if he was an outsider. Then he raised his head and looked at the ministers. He said, "If you still can't calm down, I can promise you that Her Highness will not die quietly like Hua Shangyue. I will let her die in front of you and let everyone in the world see the scene of her death." The ministers were still immersed in the excitement of seeing Her Highness. When they suddenly heard Ning Ke's words, they suddenly felt as if they had been pierced by an ice knife and a chill went straight into their organs. A young general sitting in the corner shouted angrily, "Who dares to touch Her Highness?" Ning Ke drank up the wine in his cup and got up to leave the hall. He walked upstairs. He did not answer the young general, nor did any of the ministers in the hall. It was extremely quiet in the building. Only the sound of people's rapid breathing could be heard. Because of anger, nervousness, and fear, they finally remembered that Ning Ke even dared to kill the emperor. In the room on the top floor of the House of Red Sleeves, the table was covered with embroidered cloth and a celadone bowl was filled with tremella soup. The bottom of the porcelain bowl was placed on the gorgeous peony flower. Ning Ke drank up the tremella soup and wiped his mouth. He said, "I just drank a cup of wine. I don't need to wake up." Mistress Jian said, "The problem is that you didn't eat much of the snacks on the table." Ning Ke then realized that she had been watching what happened downstairs. He said, "I really have no mood to eat these days." Mistress Jian said, "I asked Dewdrop to cook glutinous rice balls. I remember you like them." "Thank you, Aunt Jian." Ning Ke paused for a while and continued, "Tonight's matter, the academy gave Aunt Jian face. Tomorrow is Saturday. 2 chapters for those who asked for leave the day before yesterday. Happy reading this weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:19. Mistress Jian said, "This is for the sake of Her Majesty." Ning Ke said, "It involves the academy. Even the Empress has to call me youngest uncle. I don't have to give her face." Mistress Jian looked at him quietly and asked, "Do you really want to kill Li Yu?" Ning Ke said without thinking, "Letting her die is the best choice." "What?" Mistress Jian asked. Ning Ke explained, "After killing Li Huiyuan and Li Yu, Who can the ministers be loyal to even if they are still disloyal? No matter how painful and unwilling they are, they have to obey Her Majesty. In many people's eyes, this war makes it inconvenient for the imperial court and the academy to kill these people. But if you look at it from another perspective, after killing Liu, the pressure of the war in the name of righteousness will become pressure on these ministers. After hearing his words, Mistress Jen sighed and said, I used to think that you and your youngest uncle were very similar. Later you learned his great spirit, so I thought that you two were more similar. Now I realize that you are two different people after all. Ning Ke said, I can never catch up with youngest uncle in this life, but I believe that I can do better than him in some things, such as the situation the Tang Empire is facing now. Mistress Jen smiled bitterly and said, so he is dead. Ning Ke said calmly, I am not afraid of death, but I want the Tang Empire and the Academy to live. Mistress Jen looked at him with pity in her eyes. She put her hand on her chest and said after a while, but have you ever thought that although the prince has a good relationship with Summer, her surname is also Li? Hearing this name, Ning Ke thought of many things such as the thick blood in the general's mansion. He said, in my eyes he is already dead. I just need the right time. Mistress Jen said, your calmness will make people feel afraid. Ning Ke stopped talking about this and asked, I still want to know why Her Majesty opposes me killing Liu. She should not be the kind of person who can be influenced by petty feelings. I really don't know what Summer is thinking. Mistress Jen looked out of the window. It was already dark and a bright moon was hanging above the city wall. She looked confused and asked, is the headmaster really gone? Ning Ke stood up and walked to the window to look at the bright moon. He said, who knows? After a pause he continued, except for him and Haotian, who else knows? After the new year, Ning Ke stayed in Chang'an. It was not because it was inconvenient to go back and forth to the academy, but for more important reasons. He was waiting for the arrival of the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps. As spring approached, the Divine Hall's diplomatic corps finally arrived in Chang'an. Under the complicated gazes of the Tangs, the convoy of the diplomatic corps drove through Vermilion Bird Avenue and entered the hotel. The composition of the diplomatic mission was a little complicated. The leader was the head of the Revelation Institute of the West Hill Divine Palace. His two deputies were a prince of the South Jin Kingdom and the prime minister of the Yen Kingdom. It was a little funny, but what was really not funny was that the throne of the South Jin Kingdom and the Yen Kingdom was still empty. The war had temporarily come to an end, but the two armies were still in the north and south of the Tang Empire. The situation was tense, so the negotiation between the two sides quickly began with the arrival of the diplomatic corps. The learned officials of the imperial court of the Tang Empire and the members of the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps sat on both sides of the long table and began to argue as expected. Of course there was a need to negotiate. Arguments often depended not on who was more reasonable, but who had more strength. The negotiation between the two sides in the side hall of the imperial palace was only one aspect. The most important, or perhaps the most crucial place for negotiation was in another place in Chang'an, where there was a rippling lake. Before the battle with the Abbey Dean, Ning Ke walked in the streets with his knife and cut off the traces left by Sang Sang. Naturally he could not avoid the house by Yanming Lake. Fortunately the damage was not too serious and it did not take long to repair it. He had been living here since the new year. The thick snow on Yanming Lake had long melted, and the ice became a very thin mirror. Then it shattered and was blown to the shore by the wind, piling up into a snow roll, revealing the clear lake water. Ning Ke stood by the lake and reached out to push away the willow branches that had not yet sprouted green buds. Looking at the faint green stems in the water, he naturally remembered the scene of him and Sang Sang rowing a boat to plant lotus on the lake that summer. The clouds above the lake gradually gathered. There was no sound of spring thunder, but rain quietly fell. This was the first spring rain in Chang'an this year, so it naturally brought with it a bit of chill. Ning Ke walked back to the house and took a towel to wipe the rain off his body. At this moment he heard someone knocking on the door. He walked to the front of the courtyard and listened to the knocking sound. After a moment of silence, he opened the door. The rain continued to fall, soaking his clothes and the woman outside the door. Ning Ke looked at her and felt as if he had returned to that summer. She did not wear a green Taoist robe, but a blood-red robe of judgment. Her black hair did not look messy because of the wet, as she wore a luxurious crown. But she was still as beautiful as ever. Ning Ke's eyes were very calm, even when he saw the two people behind her. They were Lu Yiqing from the Sword Garret and Xia Qingyun, who was now an official of the Ministry of Rights of South Jin Kingdom. Lu Yiqing and Xia Qingyun bowed to him calmly. Lu Yiqing's eyes were blinded by Ning Quebec. He and Xie Qingyun knew each other in the academy. But as time passed, there was no need to remember many things at this time. The courtyard door slowly closed and the people accompanying them were all shut outside. Yi Hongyu followed Ning Ke into the house. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu sat under the rain porch of the plum garden, staring blankly at the spring rain falling from the sky. The sound of rain falling into the Yanming Lake could be faintly heard from the south wall of the courtyard. Now that I think about it, the days when I lived here were indeed peaceful. Yi Hongyu reached out to catch the falling rain and said, "But the world is ever-changing and the peace will not last long." Ning Ke looked at the rain splashing on her white jade-like palm and said, "Since you became the great divine priest of judgment, your words have become more and more inhuman." Yi Hongyu withdrew her hand, looked at him and said, "Are you provoking me?" "Bullshit." Ning Ke handed her the towel and said, "You'd better speak human words in front of me." He and Yi Hongyu had known each other in the wilderness for a long time. They had once killed each other but they had never fallen in love. They had once lived together but they had never been of the same mind. From the very beginning they knew that one day they would kill each other and they had tried many times. Interestingly, perhaps because they knew this very well, they seemed especially calm when they were together, as if there was a breeze lingering between them, making them feel refreshed. Ning Ke asked, "The Abbey Dean and the Hierarch are still alive. Do you mean what you say?" Yi Hongyu said, "Since I have come to Chang'an, of course I mean what I say. The problem is that the academy has never been involved in politics. How much influence do you have on the people in Chang'an?" Ning Ke said, "The token of the devil's doctrine is with me. You know the Empress background so you don't have to doubt it." Yi Hongyu said, "The Tang Empire will pay a great price, and the devil's doctrine Demonis will not be able to suppress all the opposing opinions in the court. So what is the point of this agreement?" Ning Ke said, "First of all, I don't think we will suffer too much from this agreement. Secondly, as for the effectiveness and execution of the agreement, this is something for the academy to consider, not the divine hall." Yi Hongyu said, "If it is ineffective then there is no point in negotiating." Ning Ke said, "Negotiation itself is the point." Yi Hongyu said, "That's boring. You have become so lifeless and stale because of a woman. It's ridiculous." Ning Ke's expression did not change. He said calmly, "Haotian Taoism rules the world and claims to have countless powerhouses. Isn't it even more ridiculous that a woman like you has to risk her life in Chang'an?" Yi Hongyu said, "What danger is there in Chang'an for me?" Ning Ke said, "I can kill you at any time." Yi Hongyu said, "In the swamp, if not for those wild horses, you would have been killed by me." Ning Ke said, "This is not the mud field in the wilderness. This is Chang'an." Yi Hongyu's eyes turned cold. She said, "So what?" Ning Ke said calmly, "I am invincible in Chang'an. Even the Abbey Dean will be sent flying by me. I don't think you have any chance of defeating me." Yi Hongyu said, "But don't forget, no one can defeat Haotian." Ning Ke wanted to say that he had bullied Haotian badly in the igloo by the hot sea in the far north, but he did not say it in the end. This was a matter between him and Sang Sang, and had nothing to do with anyone else. Fighting with heaven is endless joy. He thought of his teacher's words and suddenly had a new understanding. He could not help but laugh. Yi Hongyu said, "If the headmaster could really defeat Haotian, he would not become the moon, but the new Haotian." Ning Ke said, "This speculation seems to be correct, but it is completely wrong. Because you do not understand what kind of person the headmaster is. He has no interest in becoming the sky and covering everyone's head. He would rather turn into light and shine on the world, feeling the joys and sorrows of this world." The conversation in the spring rain was not a test. It was to determine the tone of the negotiation. It was not to guess the other party's bottom line, but to know what the other party wanted and where the rain would flow. Since some of the spring rain fell into Yanming Lake, and some seeped into the soil under the plum bushes, it seemed that they could not gather in one place in a short period of time. Then they needed to talk about something more specific. At this moment, Ning Ke raised his hands and reached to her temples, as if he wanted to touch her cheeks. Yi Hongyu did not react, as if she did not see his hands. Ning Ke asked, "Don't you feel heavy now?" Yi Hongyu said, "Of course, but there is no one to help me carry it." Ning Ke took the divine crown off her head and said, "Hurry up and find someone else." Yi Hongyu's wet black hair scattered on the divine robe, making her look even more beautiful. She looked at Ning Ke and said, "Where can I find someone as shameless as you? I have to go out for the whole day today, so I did not have time to write. I worked hard to write these 2 chapters last night. I really admire my hard work, and these 2 chapters are definitely in my favorite style. The next chapter will be updated soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 820. Negotiation was a battle. The one who proposed the conditions first would be the one to make the first move. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were good at fighting. They knew that the one who proposed the conditions first would gain the upper hand in the battle. That was why they thought that they should be the ones to propose the conditions first. This is Chang'an, my home ground, Ning Ke said. Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and said, the Tang Empire is in danger now. The cavalry of the Golden Palace and the Divine Hall Coalition Army are still in your territory. Ning Ke said, this is a little troublesome, but it is not the key. I heard that the Abbey Dean, the Hierarch, and your brother are all crippled. I really don't understand why you are so confident. Yi Hongyu said, the situation in the academy should be worse. Mr. Second lost his right arm. I heard that Mr. First and the 23-year cicada cultivation are still in wheelchairs. As for your other disciples, I saw their injuries in front of the Verdant Canyon. I know they won't be able to recover in a short time. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, you forgot about me? Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly, the problem is that you can't leave Chang'an. You may be invincible here, but there are many people in Haotian Taoism who can kill you if you leave Chang'an. Yes, Ning Ke had never left Chang'an since the new year. This was the only place where he could borrow the power of the God-stunning array through the array eye pestle. Even though he was also a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, he was not powerful enough to affect the entire world. Yi Hongyu continued, Haotian Taoism has existed for thousands of years. Even though the waves are a little dim now, I can find you 10 cultivators in the knowing destiny state at any time if you want to see them. If she was not exaggerating, this was enough to scare most people in the world. After all, there was not even one cultivator in the knowing destiny state in some small countries. But this was not enough to scare Ning Quebec. He said, even if there is a day when there are so many cultivators in the knowing destiny state and Tianqi state, it will be meaningless. If they dare to come to Chang'an, I will kill them all. If they are not in the Abbey Dean state, they are just courting death. Yi Hongyu said, will you stay in Chang'an for the rest of your life? Ning Ke felt that these words sounded like a wedding vow. He smiled and said, if it's really necessary, I have to do it. Fortunately, there are wine, meat, and beauties in Chang'an. It won't be too boring. It seemed like they were fighting over who could make the first offer, but in fact, both of them had already placed their chips on the table. Ning Ke did not wait for Yi Hongyu to continue and suggested, let's play rock paper scissors. This is fair and simple. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. Ning Ke said, you are the Tao addict. You are said to know everything. Don't you know how to play the finger-guessing game? You should know that rock paper scissors is also a way to win or lose. It is very particular about spirit, boldness, and calculation. Before he could finish, Yi Hongyu asked, what fist? Ning Ke said, lewd fist. Yi Hongyu asked, what fist is this? Ning Ke said, you want to learn? I can teach you. Unsurprisingly, Yi Hongyu lost. Although she was a Tao addict who knew everything, she was no match for Ning Ke in terms of gambling. One had to know that Ning Ke had gambled since he was young. He had gambled from the city of Wei to Chang'an. After experiencing hardships and even narrowly escaping death, he was finally able to cultivate. The first thing he thought of was to win money at the gambling shop. Yi Hongyu was very angry. It was not only because she did not like to lose, but also because she finally understood the meaning of lewd in the lewd fists. It was actually the word lewd. Ning Ke explained, this is a culture that has a long history. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. Yi Hongyu took a deep breath of the slightly cold air. The moisture of the spring rain moistened her lungs, allowing her to finally control her emotions. She thought that there was indeed no other person in the world who was as shameless as Ning Quebec. The Divine Hall Coalition Army has withdrawn from Qinghe Prefecture. We have to take back Qinghe Prefecture. Ning Ke's expression became serious. He said, there is no room for discussion on this matter. Yi Hongyu's expression did not change. No one could tell what she was thinking. She asked, what about the surnames? Ning Ke said, of course we have to kill them all. Yi Hongyu was still non-committal. She said, continue? Ning Ke said, the Yen Kingdom has respectfully returned the remains of the soldiers of the Northeast Border Military. Crown Prince Chongming has come to Chang'an to ask for forgiveness. He has knelt in front of the coffin for an entire night. We have no more requests. Continue. In order to express the sincerity of the Tang Empire and its attitude of peace, we are willing to withdraw from the Yueluan Kingdom. But the Pamir Mountains must be given to us. Also, the Great River Kingdom must obtain permanent neutrality. Anything else? Nothing else. Do you want to hear the Divine Hall's conditions? To be honest, I really don't want to hear it. Because neither the Academy nor the Imperial Court will agree to it. But you still have to listen in the end. It's already noon. Let's eat first. Ning Ke asked Yi Hongyu to change out of the divine robe of judgment. It was a little sad that Yi Hongyu's clothes were still in the plum garden. The two walked to the Yanming Lake and walked along the wooden bridge among the reeds to the west. They walked to the street and left Lu Yiqing and Xie Qingyun who were in front of the courtyard. Ning Ke bought a few sesame cakes on the street and continued to walk to the southern city with her. On the way they saw many people holding crutches and many injured soldiers. Most of the injured soldiers were carried back from the front line. They looked very miserable with broken limbs. Most of the people were injured on the day the Abbey Dean entered Chang'an. The entire city is filled with people holding crutches. Yi Hongyu said, "The Tang Empire is already in such a miserable state. Why does the Academy still have to hold on?" Ning Ke said, "The same scene can be interpreted differently. In the eyes of the Divine Hall, so many injured people holding crutches is enough to prove that the Tang Empire is about to collapse. But in my eyes, it proves that the Tang Empire is still very strong because we have the ability to save the injured from the front line. Most importantly, even the most ordinary Tangs dare to fight against such a terrifying enemy like the Abbey Dean. The entire city is filled with people holding crutches? No, in my eyes they are not crutches. They are all knives, very sharp knives." Yi Hongyu said nothing more. Ning Ke stopped at the entrance of the Shirshir Alley in the southern city. There were two big trees at the entrance of the alley. One was an unknown tree and the other was an unknown tree. They were gradually turning green in the spring breeze. Yi Hongyu asked, "Has the calligraphy addict left?" Ning Ke said, "She is studying with eldest brother in the academy." Yi Hongyu said, "If we want to ask about heaven's way, how can we be trapped by love? I was thinking about this a few days ago." Ning Ke walked to the tree and looked for green buds among the bare branches, but found it difficult. "We saw these two trees turning green in the spring breeze, but now it is difficult to find green buds under the tree. Heaven's way is like spring, which can only be seen from afar. Small things like love are like green buds. You can see heaven's will but you can't catch it. It is because you don't want to lower yourself to the dust, and you don't want to put your eyes on the bare and ugly bark. Heaven's way is a small matter." He looked at Yi Hongyu and frowned slightly. "I didn't see second brother fight with Liu Bai and Yi Su in front of the Verdant Canyon, but you saw it. Don't tell me your thoughts haven't changed?" Yi Hongyu thought of what her brother said before he left and fell silent. Everyone's way is different. Teacher's way is against heaven's way. What is yours? Ning Ke looked at her and said, "What are you pursuing in this life? In the past, you wanted to catch up with your brother and become a powerhouse in Haoyan Taoism. You wanted your brother to be the Abbey Dean. But what's the point of being the Abbey Dean? You still wandered around the South Sea for decades and couldn't even return to the Jishou Abbey. Later you wanted to become the strongest and surpass your brother. But what's the point? You and I may be the two best at fighting in this world. No one in the same state can be our match. But have you ever thought that I can't become the headmaster, and you can't become as strong as the Abbey Dean? Then what's the point of cultivating like this?" Yi Hongyu said, "Not everything needs to be interesting." Ning Ke said, "Teacher once said that we don't live to have meaning, but to be interesting." Yi Hongyu said, "I live to become stronger." Ning Ke asked, "I once desired to become stronger because I wanted to survive with Sang Sang. I also wanted to take revenge, so I had an obsession. But you grew up in the Jishou Abbey and then went to the Revelation Institute on the Peach Mountain. Finally, you entered the judicial department until today. Your life has been smooth sailing. Where did your obsession come from?" Yi Hongyu said calmly, "Not everything needs a reason. Becoming stronger can be understood as an instinct. Just like how an ant sees two green leaves, it also wants to take the bigger one. As a cultivator, I'm not interested in power or profit. But I always like the feeling when I stand on the top of the mountain and look at the scenery." Ning Ke thought of the time when he successfully climbed the mountain and saw the scenery on the top of the mountain. At that time, the starlight was like silver, the clouds were floating between the cliffs, and there were a few mountain peaks in the distance. It was extremely beautiful. "That feeling is really good." He agreed with Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu said, "You didn't kill Li Yu. Aren't you worried about internal strife?" Ning Ke looked at the calm passers-by on the street and said, "Is it possible for you to see internal strife in Chang'an? The Divine Hall has many spies in Chang'an. You should know that I can kill her at any time. I just don't want to for now. So you don't want to kill her, or you can't bear to kill her? Yi Hongyu said, you don't want to kill her because of her relationship with the Golden Tribe Royal Court. You haven't mentioned the Golden Tribe Royal Court before. It seems that you have already made arrangements for the north. Ning Ke said, I don't have any arrangements. Yi Hongyu said, the Divine Hall has an influence on the Golden Tribe Royal Court that the Academy can't imagine. Ning Ke said, isn't it just the everlasting heaven? When I passed by the wilderness last year, I felt something strange. After that, I asked someone to investigate and found out that the Divine Hall has been preaching in the Golden Tribe Royal Court all these years. It was really interesting. Did Hao Yin think that no one would recognize him after he changed his identity? Yi Hongyu didn't expect that he already knew about this. She said, you have no arrangements for the north and rejected the Divine Hall's good intentions. What do you think about the Golden Tribe Royal Court? Ning Ke said, I only have one thought about the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Yi Hongyu asked, what is it? Ning Ke said, kill them all. I wish everyone a happy weekend. 2 more chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 821. This sentence itself and the unspoken meaning hidden in it were very bloody and cruel. However, Ning Ke's tone was very calm and normal, as if it was a matter of course. He looked calm and even had a sincere smile on his face. To him, there was nothing to talk about with the Golden Tribe Royal Court. He would not accept anything other than being killed. Even Yi Hongyu felt a chill at this moment. Spring had just arrived, and some of the green buds on some trees were so small that they were hard to see with the naked eye, while some of the trees had already sprouted tender green leaves. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew on the street, snapping the tender stems and causing green leaves to fall. Qingya landed on the ground from the sky, and the conversation finally came to an end. Yi Hongyu raised the demands of the West Hill Divine Palace, which were in direct opposition to the conditions that Ning Ke had raised by the Yanming Lake. The Divine Palace wanted to ensure the independence of Qinghe Prefecture, and they wanted the Tang Empire to pay a large amount of war reparations, and the royal family had to go to Peach Mountain to apologize. The Golden Palace wanted the large pasture around Xiangwan Plain and Helan City. As for Yueluan, Yen, Jin, Qi and Song, they naturally had their own demands, but they were relatively unimportant. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke asked, what's going on with Longqing now? 2,000 elite cavalrymen were annihilated. Although he was lucky enough to survive, he was heavily injured and is currently recuperating in the Divine Hall. I don't know when he will recover. Yi Hongyu did not like Longqing at all. Her expression did not change when he was mentioned, but she did not understand why Ning Ke would suddenly mention him. She said, although his cultivation state is above yours, you should not be so vigilant. Ning Ke said, asking doesn't mean being vigilant. Yi Hongyu said, then why ask him? A few years ago in Chang'an I said something to him. Ning Ke said, I told him at that time that you were really beautiful. In that case don't think too much about it. Yi Hongyu remained silent. Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, everyone knows that Tao Addict is the most beautiful woman in the world. So I shouldn't be too optimistic? Yi Hongyu said, no matter how strong you are in your words, no matter how unwilling you are, you still have to accept these conditions. Ning Ke said with a smile, I don't see any reason to promise you. Yi Hongyu said, I can't tell either. But someone told me that you would agree. Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, who? Abby Dean? Yi Hongyu did not answer his question and turned to leave the green tree. Ning Ke did not leave with her. He looked at the green leaves on the ground and his frown deepened. Yi Hongyu's last 2 sentences made him feel uneasy. The negotiation between the diplomatic corps of the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire continued in the side hall of the palace. The 2 sides had too much difference in judgment of the situation, and there was no way to find a mutually acceptable solution. It was only suitable for the situation at the table, not for the negotiation. Therefore the 2 sides continued to talk. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu were still watching the spring rain in the house by the Yanming Lake. They chatted about trivial things, testing each other's patience, and wanted to determine each other's confidence and bottom line. During this time, Crown Prince Chongming finally ascended the throne in Qingjing City and became the new emperor of the Yan Kingdom. He successfully subdued the power of Longqing's faction and began to focus on internal affairs. The South Jin Kingdom also became peaceful. Under the powerful deterrence of the sword Garrett, especially under the influence of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, the royal family and the military that had been restless became much more rational. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army did not completely retreat to their respective countries. Instead, they continued to stay in Qinghe Prefecture. The Qinghe warlords provided food and logistics to maintain a sufficient deterrence to the Tang Empire. After the Tang Empire's western army retreated to the Pamir Mountains, the Yueluan Kingdom, which had suffered a military shortage for the first time in countless years, finally recognized their position. They kept a low profile as if there was no such country in the world. The monks of the White Tower Temple began to prepare for the election of a new emperor, while the Xiankong Temple did not express any opinion. The world seemed to have gotten rid of the threat of war, but no one forgot the north. The cavalry of the Golden Palace, after surviving the cold winter in the 7 stockade villages, began to move again in the spring. The soldiers and civilians of the Tang Empire all stared at the north. Although they were vigilant, they were not as nervous as they were at the beginning of the war. As time went by, the power of the Tang Empire was gradually recovering. Smoke rose from the fields of the eastern border. The northern battlefront army's armor was brand new, and their new weapons were very sophisticated. Caravans carrying food and supplies kept going back and forth on the well-connected roads of the Tang Empire. The mines and workshops were in full swing. The curfew in Chang'an was lifted, and smiles gradually appeared on people's faces. The negotiation was a competition of patience and confidence in time. The Tang Empire never lacked confidence in this aspect. From the visible changes, it seemed that the victory was in their favor. Mo Shanshan sat by the stream reading an old book. The eldest brother sat beside her, fishing with a fishing rod. His cotton-padded jacket gently fluttered in the breeze. He did not change his posture for a long time, as if he had fallen asleep. The stream was a mountain stream, flowing from the pool formed by the waterfall in the cliff. The second brother stood by the pool, looking at the waterfall behind the pool with a serious expression. The big white goose floated in the pool, its red paws plucking the water from time to time. It looked at the waterfall like the second brother, with a serious and mocking expression. There were 2 pairs of crutches by the pool and 2 teenagers under the waterfall. Zhang Yinzu and Li Guangdi were squatting under the waterfall. They had not fully recovered from their injuries, and when they were hit by the strong cold water, their faces turned even paler, as if they were going to fall at any time. In fact, they had fallen many times, but when they saw Mr. Second standing by the pool, and especially the hateful big white goose, they still clenched their teeth and held on. They walked along the stones behind the pool, passed through the narrow gorge and arrived at the precipice behind the mountain. A wheelchair was parked on a small stone platform. Yu Lian sat in the wheelchair holding a pen and paper in her hand. She was writing the hairpin-style small regular script. Although there was no writing desk, her handwriting on the paper was still so neat. When her eyes were tired, she would look at the flowing clouds in front of the precipice and Chang'an City in the distance for a short rest. Sometimes she would look at the narrow stone path above the precipice. The stone path led to the cliff cave where Ning Ke used to practice in seclusion. It was very narrow and it was very dangerous to walk on it. When the strong mountain wind blew, one could fall into the abyss at any time. Tang Xiaotang was on the stone path at this time. What she needed to do was to use the blood-colored giant knife in her hand to chisel the rock wall and widen the ladder on the stone path. This was a very meaningful work, but also a very difficult one. The rocks between the precipice were very hard. Even though she had cultivated the devil's doctrine since childhood and possessed great strength, it was still difficult for her to chisel it. What annoyed her most was that the result of Yu Lian jumping into the blue sky and cutting off the rainbow in the Battle of Chang, and was that the blood-colored giant knife in her hand had been destroyed beyond recognition. She had been chiseling on the stone path on the precipice for more than 10 days, but she had only completed less than 1/10 of it. Looking up, she could not see the end of the steep mountain path. The melon shed in front of the cliff cave was still a small black dot. The little white wolf was lying on the stone ladder above and dozing off. Listening to the sound of chiseling coming from below, it felt a little annoyed. It was not worried that it would break the stone chips, because according to the speed of the past few days, it would take at least a few days for Tang Xiaotang to chisel to where it was sleeping now. Song Qian and the 8th younger brother were playing chess with bandages. One hand was gently plucking the strings of the zither. That was the only hand that Beigong could move. Wang Qi was brewing medicine in the yard. There were all kinds of flowers and herbs piled up in the corner. After a while, the old yellow bull came in with a head full of wildflowers. The 4th brother, Fan Yu, was coughing and discussing the god-stunning array with Muyu. The sixth brother looked at the iron stove that had been out for many days and sighed. Those who taught were teaching, those who educated were educating, and those who were tortured were destined to continue to be tortured. The scholars were still reading and the recuperating were still recuperating. The back of the mountain of the academy was peaceful and warm. Suddenly the eldest brother opened his eyes. He looked at the mountain stream under the stone and slowly lifted the fishing rod in his hand. There was no hook on the line. The eldest brother never used a hook when fishing, not even a straight one. But now when he lifted the fishing rod, there were 3 grass carps on the line. The 3 grass carps were suspended in the air beside the line, struggling desperately. They were not tied to anything but they could not break free no matter how hard they struggled. Their tails flicked, and the water droplets that were thrown out refracted the sunlight on the stream. It was very beautiful. The eldest brother shook his wrist slightly, and the 3 grass carps were finally freed and fell into the stream. He looked at the stream quietly and suddenly said to Emo Shanshan, "Take your time to read it. If there is anything you don't understand, just read it first. Ask me when I come back." Emo Shanshan's expression changed slightly. She sensed that something had happened. She closed the old book and walked to the eldest brother. She said, "I'll go with you." The eldest brother looked at her and smiled gently. He said, "It's not a big deal. It's just a little sudden." The eldest brother left the stream in a wheelchair and walked out of the clouds on the mountainside. The expression on his face was very solemn, not as calm as usual, so he arrived very quickly. Yulian was even faster than him. She was wearing a light yellow dress, sitting in a wheelchair and looking in the direction of Chang'an. A cold wind blew on the mountain path, stirring up layers of yellow leaves in the autumn and the hem of her dress. Yulian said, "I didn't expect that he would really come." The eldest brother said, "The headmaster is gone, so they can come as they like. What I don't understand is why they came." Yulian said, "I don't understand either. It seems that we can only ask them face to face." The eldest brother said gently and firmly, "I am the senior brother, so I should be the one asking." Yulian said, "Senior brother, you are really slow now, so I have to go." Someone had come to Chang'an. They didn't know who it was. The eldest brother and Yulian knew, so they wanted to meet him. They looked very serious and serious, even more serious than when they faced the Abbey Dean. Who was that person? I'll try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:22. There was a rustling sound on the mountain path. The female professor walked to eldest brother and Yulian, put down the broom in her hand, and patted the dust off her green gown. Her wrinkled face was full of calmness. She said, "Since you are all like this, I should go." She had not been involved in the world for many years. When the world was fighting against the Tang Empire, she could only watch silently because of her family background. However, that person had come to Chang'an today, and even she could not sit still in the classroom. At this moment, Junimo walked out of the mountain fog and said, "Stop fighting. Senior brother and junior sister have not recovered, and you are all so old. It should be me." The female professor said, "How rude of you." At this moment, the 4 people present were the 4 strongest people in the academy. That person had come to Chang'an, so the academy would naturally let them receive him. However, they all knew that once he left, it would be hard to predict what would happen, so they argued. Junimo was silent. The female professor stared into his eyes and said, "Even if you are in your best condition, you are still no match for him. My sword has never asked for perfection." Junimo said, "So many people who are stronger than me still lost to me. Even Lu Bai did not take advantage of me." The female professor stopped talking when Lu Bai was mentioned, and the wrinkles on her face deepened. "Come out," Junimo said. Following these words, Zhang Yinzu and Li Guangdi walked out of the clouds. This was the first time they had walked out of the cloud gate formation alone, so they were a bit excited. However, the pool water was extremely cold and their faces were pale. They looked extremely miserable. Junimo looked at eldest brother and Yu Lian in the wheelchair and said, "Stop fighting. I want to bring them back to Chang'an, so it is on the way to see that person. I have a reason, so I will go." Yu Lian said, "Why do you want to bring them back to Chang'an?" Junimo thought for a while and said, "Home visit?" The atmosphere in the carriage was very depressing because Junimo did not say anything. Zhang Yinzu and Li Guangdi secretly exchanged glances and vaguely guessed that something big had happened in Chang'an. They became nervous and did not dare to talk. They kept their mouths shut and looked at the scenery outside the window. There were only spots of green in the tree branches beside the road. The two teenagers looked along the neat trees and saw the city wall of Chang'an City in the distance. At noon, the south gate of Chang'an should have been very busy. The soldiers of the city patrol department should have been carefully checking the people coming in and out. The people in the queue should have been complaining about the speed of entering the city, and the peddlers selling herbal tea and eggs could not stop drinking. However, it was unusually quiet today. In the daytime, the two heavy and mountainous city gates were tightly shut. There were no pedestrians, no hawkers, no soldiers of the city patrol division, not a single person in front of the city gates. There was only one carriage. The carriage looked very ordinary. It was covered with mud and dust and had no luster to speak of. Occasionally, a chilly spring breeze would blow off some of the dust on the carriage, revealing the dark color inside. It seemed to be made of steel, and a few smooth lines could be vaguely seen. There were no horses in the black carriage, only a single carriage. The place where the wheels touched the ground had sunk deeply, and fine gravel could be seen on both sides. Looking back, one could see that the hard stone surface of the state highway had been crushed into two very deep marks, stretching to a very far place, with no end in sight. How heavy was this carriage? How could the road be so damaged? What was more eye-catching than the carriage was the person standing beside it. Since there were no horses, could it be that he had pulled such a heavy carriage so far with his bare hands? The person was wearing an ordinary cloth gown. His eyes were ordinary and there were a few wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. However, his skin was very delicate and his hair was a little gray. If one looked closely, one would find that his black hair revealed a sense of youth. It was hard to tell how old he was or whether he was young or old. A flagon was tied to the person's waist, swaying gently with the spring breeze. He seemed to be waiting for someone. Feeling a little bored, he picked up the flagon and took a sip. When he drank, his expression was very heroic, like a whale drinking seawater. He did not put down the flagon for a long time, but the flagon never reached the bottom and there was always wine pouring out. On the city wall, countless crossbows were aimed at the drinking man, but no one dared to shoot, because the man did not care that he was being aimed at by the powerful crossbows. He minded his own business, drinking alone in the spring breeze, as if he did not exist in this world. The man put down the flagon, wiped his mouth and narrowed his eyes. His slightly narrowed eyes were full of intoxication because in this life, there was nothing else he loved but wine. However, if one looked at the deepest part of his eyes, one could see that his eyes were so cold and full of vicissitudes, because in his long life he had already seen through everything and was long tired of this world, so he was heartless. The sound of hooves gradually slowed down, and another carriage arrived in front of the city gate. Zhang Yinzu squeezed to Li Guangdi's side, and the two youths looked at the man through the window. Their bodies could not help but tremble, and their faces were extremely pale, because they seemed to see the Taoist and indigo on the street that day. Junimo lifted the curtain in front of the carriage and got off. He walked in front of the man and slowly stopped. The spring breeze caressed the empty sleeve below his right arm. His posture was gentle, but his breath was cold. The iron sword was in the sheath at his waist and he did not pull it out. Junimo looked at the man beside the black carriage, and his eyes fell on the flagon at his waist. After a long silence, he bowed his head and said, "Greetings, Senior." The man was somewhat satisfied and said, "No need to be so polite." It was a simple sentence, but it made the South City Gate tremble. This was because the man's voice was very old, extremely old, and when the air passed through his vocal cords, it was like bronze covered in dust rubbing against each other. Even if the dust and dirt were rubbed off, it was followed by the friction of the rust on the bronze, which made everyone's soul throb. Zhang Yinzu and Li Guangdi did not get off the carriage. After hearing this voice, their faces became even paler, and their bodies suddenly became as cold as ice, as if they had suddenly arrived at the age of death from their youth. Countless painful groans came from inside the city wall. The Tang soldiers who aimed at the man with crossbows were shocked by this voice, and even the moss-covered bricks of the city wall showed some signs of loosening. The city wall had withstood thousands of years of wind and rain, but it was still too young before this old voice. Junimo raised his head, and his expression was still calm, without any respect in his eyes. He said, "Leave or die." The spring breeze blew again, and the flagon on the man's waist swayed again. He was a little surprised and then became indifferent again. He looked at Junimo and said, "I heard that you value etiquette the most. I have already paid my respects to Senior, so I don't need to be more polite." Junimo looked at the man and said, "Etiquette is based on respect. I paid my respects to you because of your seniority. My teacher once asked you, but it was based on the order, not you. The man slightly raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, why am I not worthy of respect? Junimo said, because you are a coward. With this sentence, the chi of heaven and earth in front of the South City Gate suddenly changed dramatically. The spring breeze turned into a bone-chilling wind. Junmo's empty sleeve swayed in the spring breeze, as if it had been starched too many times, suddenly stiffened, and the soft lines on the sleeve became extremely sharp lines. His right arm was broken, but he still had his sleeve. He did not draw his sword, but his sleeve was still full of sword wills. In the sudden cold spring breeze, there were countless sharp sword wills. In the carriage, Zhang Yanzu and Li Guangdi's faces became even paler, because they found that there seemed to be many sharp lines in the air, and every breath was so painful. Countless sword marks appeared in front of the man. The wine flask at his waist suddenly emitted countless clear sounds before gradually fading away. He looked at Junimo and said, his taste in accepting disciples is indeed much better than ours. Junimo said, my teacher is much better than you two at everything. After saying this, he stretched his left hand to his waist, held the middle of the scabbard, and held the sword horizontally in front of him. The iron sword was still at the same level as his eyebrows, and he seemed to be respectful, but in fact he was as cold as ice. Junimo performed the junior's salute. He held the sword horizontally in front of him, and his expression was solemn. The iron sword was square and wide, and in the wind, it was like an indestructible city wall. The shadow of the iron sword and the sleeve fell on the ground, and it was like a solemn and continuous green mountain. You guarded the verdant canyon for 7 days, defeated Yisu, and then injured Liu Bai. You are indeed extraordinary. The man saw Junimo holding the sword horizontally, and his expression became more serious. But only a little. He waved his sleeve and the spring breeze came lingering around him. His aura suddenly increased and he broke through 5 states in a flash. No one knew which mountain he was on. He was not in the city, so the city wall could not stop him. He was not in the Green Mountain, so the Green Mountain could not see him. He did not want to fight, and even someone as strong as Junimo could not fight. What state was this? My teacher said that in terms of this state, even Buddha is not as good as you. Junmo's gaze passed through the sword and fell on the man. He said, since you don't want to fight, why are you here? The man looked at him and said, I came to Chang and to return something to the academy. Junimo asked, what is it? The man said, it's this carriage. Junimo said, I have arrived. You can leave now. The man asked, is this carriage yours? Junimo said, no. The man said, in that case I am not looking for you. Junimo said, since it is youngest brother's carriage, I can make the decision. The man shook his head slowly and took a sip from the flagon on his waist. He looked back at the old mottled city wall and said, no, because you can't make the decision for this city. Junimo looked at him and did not speak. He only had one hand holding the scabbard, so he could not hold the hilt. The iron sword was pulled out of the scabbard by itself, and with a slight sound of friction, it was about to show its sharpness. At this moment, the sound of friction came from the city gate, and then it slowly opened. 2 more chapters tomorrow. Please vote for me on Monday. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 823. The city gate opened slowly and Ning Ke showed up. He carried the iron cutlass on his back and held the iron pestle in his hand. He stood in the city gate and looked outside. He said, Senior brother, since he is here for me, I will talk to him. Junimo pondered for a moment. His eyebrows were like the surface of a lake covered by the shade of willow trees. The broad and straight iron sword slowly returned to its sheath. He bowed to the man beside the carriage again and walked back to his own carriage. The carriage entered Chang'an and stopped beside Ning Quebec. Junimo looked at him and said, Since you want to talk, you should talk nicely. Although the headmaster is no longer in the world, the academy is still here. Such a coward is not qualified to disturb us. Ning Ke bowed and said calmly, I understand. He looked at the old and dirty carriage outside the city gate. He saw the black steel walls of the carriage that had been blown away by the spring wind and the familiar seal lines. Then he looked at the man beside the carriage. Only second brother dares to say that this man is a coward. Ning Ke thought to himself because he knew who this man who seemed to ignore time was. This man had appeared in the headmaster's conversation and in his dream. He once had a dream. In that dream he came to the wilderness. Everyone in the wilderness looked up at the sky where light and darkness separated. He saw the tall figure of his teacher, a drunkard and a butcher. Then he had another dream. That time the headmaster snatched the wine bag from the drunkard and took a sip. Then he snatched a pig leg from the butcher's back and ate it. The headmaster once mentioned in a conversation in the back of the mountain of the academy that there were two grand cultivators who had experienced the everlasting night. One was the drunkard and the other was the butcher. They were the two people in his dream. Last year, he took Sang Sang to the wilderness in a black carriage and saw the battle between the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army and the Desolate Man. At that time he realized that this was the place he saw in his dream. In the dream that became reality, he saw the confrontation between light and darkness in the sky. He saw the divine kingdom of light and the giant golden dragon head behind the clouds. The headmaster was indeed tall. But he did not see the drunkard or the butcher until today. The drunkard and the butcher were able to survive the long everlasting night and live eternally under the gaze of Haotian, which meant that they had the means to defeat Haotian. In the words of the headmaster, cultivation was a competition of who lived the longest. Therefore, the states of these two people had undoubtedly reached an unimaginable level. In the words of the headmaster, these two people were probably not human anymore. Among the people Ning Ke knew, except for the headmaster, no one had seen the drunkard and the butcher. Perhaps only the headmaster could find them. As long as they were alive, they would be legends in the human world. The man was carrying a wine pot, but there was no pig leg on his back. Naturally, he was not the butcher. Ning Ke was not an ordinary person, but he was still shocked and vigilant when looking at this man. After a while, he calmed down and asked, "Senior drunkard, what can I do for you?" The drunkard looked at him and said in a hoarse voice, "Someone asked me to return something to you." His voice was still so unpleasant to hear, as if every word carried the accumulated soil of the tombs of ancient kings and the smell of silk soaked in corpse water. Ning Ke frowned slightly. Second brother had asked him what it was, but he did not ask again. Looking at the horse carriage that had accompanied him for many years in the tracks on the official road, he naturally thought of what had happened by the Sisui River. At the Sisui River, Sang Sang showed her true immortal body. She was in the dark night and stepped on the light like a white lotus. She asked the headmaster to ascend to the sky and go to the divine kingdom of Haotian together. Colorful flowers fell from the sky and shook the firmament. The headmaster and Sang Sang left there. The big black horse, the primordial 13 arrows and the big black umbrella in the black horse carriage also parted with him at the Sisui River. Ning Ke had sent people to search for them after that, but the big black horse was nowhere to be found in the wind by the Sisui River. The black horse carriage and the things in it had also disappeared. Today, one thing finally returned to the human world. Then what about the rest? The arrows? The umbrella? Where was the silly big black horse? The headmaster? And Sang Sang? Ning Ke's emotions were unstable. It took him a long time to calm down and focus on the reality. Who was it that wanted to return his things? Who was it that had the ability to find the drunkard and make him the messenger? Who is it? He looked at the drunkard and asked directly. The drunkard's response was also very direct. He did not answer. The headmaster was not in the human world. As long as he did not want to answer, no one could make him speak. The spring breeze brushed against Ning Ke's cheeks. It was not warm at all. Instead, it was extremely cold. Or maybe it was just his own body and mind that made the temperature of the spring breeze around him drop. At the Sisui River, he saw the headmaster ascending to the sky with Sang Sang. Then, the entrance of the divine kingdom of Haotian exploded and the sky was full of shooting stars. He was sure that Sang Sang was dead or had returned to the divine kingdom of Haotian. Either way, she was not in the human world anymore. If she was still here, he would have felt it. Then who took the big black horse? Who picked up the iron arrows? Who was holding the shabby big black umbrella in the human world? Who was returning the horse carriage to him? Why was it in the drunkard's hands? Ning Ke could not understand these things. Yesterday was the day that disturbed my mind. He looked up at the dim spring sun in the sky. After a moment of silence, he continued, "Why think about those who abandoned me?" Then he looked at the drunkard and said, "Sir, please come in." It was extremely quiet in front of the southern city gate. As he said that, a tense atmosphere gushed out from the deepest part of the city wall and floated to the sky. The drunkard looked at the magnificent city wall of Chang and then asked, "Why should I come in?" Ning Ke said, "Since I am a guest, there is no reason not to come in." The drunkard said, "As a bad guest, you should have the self-awareness not to enter the house." Ning Ke said, "A good guest and a bad guest are both guests. A guest should do as the host pleases." The drunkard found him very interesting and said with a smile, "Then I am not a guest." Ning Ke also smiled, but his real feeling was not like that. If he was not a guest, he was definitely an enemy. He looked at the drunkard and said seriously, "Since I am not entering the city, how can I return it to me?" The drunkard looked at him as if he was looking at a shameless child and said, "I am already so old and tired after such a long journey. Do I have to walk the last few steps by myself?" Ning Ke said, "Even if it is only a few steps, it is still not there." The drunkard said, "You can come out." Ning Ke said with a smile, "You can come in." The drunkard looked at the old mottled city wall of Chang and again and said after a moment of silence, "Another day." Hearing this, Ning Ke said without hesitation, "Another day is better than another day." It was an invitation and also a gamble. To be more precise, he was gambling with his life. He was gambling with his life, the life of the entire Chang'an city, the life of the Tang Empire and the fate of the human world. This chapter is 2,000 words. I will write the next one. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 8:24. The drunkard didn't accept Ning Ke's invitation and said, "I don't want to go in today." Ning Ke raised his voice and said, "You still don't dare to go in?" The drunkard's expression gradually changed. His hair, which was a mixture of white snow and black soil, was blown by the wind. He said, "For countless years, I have only been accompanied by wine and meat, and I especially like wine. Only when I am drunk can I relieve my worries. Wine can make people angry, but it can also make people feel relieved. I chose the latter, but it doesn't mean I can't choose the former." Ning Ke stared into his eyes and continued, "But you still don't dare to go in?" The drunkard said, "You can come out." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I'm timid." The drunkard said, "You dare to attack the Abbey Dean on the snowy street. How can you be timid?" Ning Ke said, "I don't dare to go out of the city, which means I'm timid. What about you? Do you dare to go in?" The drunkard said, "This kind of talk is really boring." Ning Ke said, "Come in if you dare, come out if you dare, come up if you dare, come down if you dare. This is something that only kids do when they quarrel. It's boring and even shameful. As a junior, I can be shameful, but can you be shameful as well? Let's be straightforward and come in." This conversation was actually about different things. It looked a little funny and even cute, but who knew how many frost blades and snow swords were hidden in it? It was bone-chilling. Ning Ke's words kept moving forward. What he wanted to do was to invite the drunkard into Chang'an. Whether he accepted or not, the academy would find the opportunity they wanted in this sudden and dangerous meeting. This was the academy's plan. The drunkard only used one method to break the academy's plan. He raised the flagon and started drinking. His mouth was used for drinking, so he couldn't talk. Not talking didn't mean he refused or accepted. It was quiet in front of the southern city gate. Only the sound of the wine pouring into the drunkard's stomach could be heard. It sounded like a waterfall falling into a pond or a gurgling stream, and finally like a river that was about to overflow. As mentioned before, the headmaster was not in the human world. So no one could make the drunkard talk or hold his hand and invite him into the city or home. The drunkard put down the flagon. Ning Ke looked at the wine stain on the front of his robe and suddenly smiled. His smile was a little helpless, a little self-mocking and a little gloomy. The drunkard was a grand cultivator who had survived the everlasting night. He was a senior who even the headmaster of academy once asked about Taoism. Even though he had the support of Chang'an City, it was still impossible for him to disturb the drunkard's state of mind with simple words. The smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at the drunkard and said, "If so, please leave the carriage here. I will send someone to pick it up later." The drunkard looked at him and said with a smile, "How can I leave without returning it to you personally?" With that, the situation in front of the city gate was suddenly reversed. Previously, Chang'an had taken the initiative. Now it was the drunkard who challenged Chang'an. With Ning Ke's state, it should have been difficult for him to deal with it. However, he was a man who had experienced life and death and seen different worlds. His state of mind was firmer and more fearless than anyone could imagine. "I'm a coward, an idiot, a peeping Tom, I molested little girls, I'm cruel, cold and timid. I'm just a pile of scum. Even a broom can't make me into a pile." Ning Ke looked at the drunkard and said seriously, "I'm shameless. No matter what, I won't step out of Chang'an City today. I won't come out even if you bring my wife back to life and tell me that you want to kill her." If one could maintain an indifferent attitude towards many things, emotions and dignity, including oneself, then one would naturally be fearless. There was another saying about this attitude. Without love there would be no fear. Without desire there would be no demands. The drunkard understood what he meant. He knew that no matter what he did or how many people he killed, he could never force Ning Ke out of Chang'an City. Therefore he gave up trying. This time he left the small town where he lived in seclusion and came to Chang'an. Other than being entrusted by someone, he also wanted to see the academy after the headmaster of academy left. He wanted to see what kind of person Ning Ke was. He was not disappointed. The headmaster of academy's choice of students was indeed not disappointing. Therefore he was a little disappointed. Because the world seemed to be walking on the same track as before. Because he was a little disappointed, he sighed and patted the horse carriage beside him. His action was very casual. His palm fell softly without any additional force. The horse carriage suddenly became shorter. That was because the wheels made of stainless steel all sank into the hard ground. Then, under the terrifying counterforce, the carriage suddenly jumped up into the air. This horse carriage was a relic of Master Yensei. It was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. If the talisman array was not turned on like this, it would break into pieces. Such a heavy carriage was patted into the air by the drunkard, as if he was patting a ball. The drunkard waved his sleeves. The spring wind was slightly chaotic. The heavy steel carriage, like a giant stone thrown by a catapult, roared toward the city gate. Ning Ke held the array pestle tightly. Countless vigorous chi of heaven and earth gushed out from the city gate and poured into his body through the array pestle. It instantly filled up his snow mountain and ocean of chi, providing him with endless psyche power and strength. Bang! He pulled out his cutlass and cut the spring wind. The iron cutlass chopped on the carriage. The black carriage suddenly stopped and hung in the spring wind in front of the city gate. The first spring thunder of this year exploded in front of the southern city of Chang'an. Several light cyan airflows spread out from the point where the iron cutlass and the carriage touched. In a flash, the cyan airflows expanded to a radius of dozens of feet, looking like several light shields. Ning Ke and the black carriage were right in the center of the cyan light shield. The cyan light shield only lasted for a very short time and then broke with a slight sound. Countless fragments of the chi of heaven and earth sprayed around. The trees outside the city gate were broken before they could sprout green buds. The gravel on the state highway shot away like arrows. The city wall had withstood thousands of years of wind and rain, and its surface had traces of weathering. After such a terrible shock, countless green bricks peeled off and fell down like a rainstorm. The wind stopped and the dust settled. The green bricks on the city wall became more mottled, but no obvious damage could be seen. On the contrary, the green bricks that were cut off by the aura were extremely smooth as if they were new bricks. After all, it was impossible to shake Chang'an City. Interesting. The drunkard looked at the city wall and said. Then he looked at Ning Ke and said, "But you are not interesting. You know, there are many things that I haven't done for thousands of years, but it doesn't mean that I can't do them." Ning Ke put away his cutlass. The black carriage finally fell to the ground with a heavy thud. He looked at the drunkard and said, "I was just kidding. Did you take it seriously?" He was smiling when he said this, although he was annoyed at the moment. Because he had to smile. Sometimes only a smile could prove his strength. Then he started coughing and took half a step back inadvertently. He turned his body slightly and held the hilt and the array pestle tightly. One of his hands was as cold as ice, and the other was as hot as flowing lava. "I said you are not interesting because you can't do it." The drunkard looked at him and said, "No one can do it after your headmaster left." Ning Ke knew that he couldn't do it because he couldn't leave Chang'an. But his headmaster could take the eldest brother to travel around many countries in an ox cart for many years. The most important thing is that it's not up to you to decide whether you can write that character or not. The drunkard seemed to be really disappointed, and his eyebrows were slightly furrowed. Ning Ke wanted to salvage something, so he said, "At least I have written it. You dare not enter the city is the proof." The drunkard said, "No matter how big Chang'an is, it is just a city after all. It is still too small compared to the world." Ning Ke said, "One day I will leave Chang'an." The drunkard said, "Even if you have the courage, you can't turn the whole world into Chang'an. We are all part of this world, so how can we change the world? Your headmaster can't do it, I can't do it, and neither can Qin Mao. How can you do it?" Ning Ke couldn't answer. The negotiation between the academy and the divine hall was in a stalemate, and it was a very delicate and critical moment. At this moment, the drunkard, a hidden powerhouse who could change the situation of the world, must have a purpose. The academy and the Tang Empire didn't want to see that kind of change. "I don't understand why you came to Chang'an." Ning Ke looked at the drunkard's eyes and said, even if the academy or he couldn't change the relationship between Hao Yin and the human world, the drunkard shouldn't be here. He looked at the drunkard's eyes and said seriously, in my dream, you and the butcher are both looking at me. It means that just like the moment before, there is still hope for you. Dreams are often the opposite of reality, the drunkard said. Ning Ke said, the headmaster said that you and the butcher both experienced the last everlasting night. If so, it means that even Hao Yin couldn't do anything to you. Why did you show up? Why did you come to Chang'an? I've drunk too much these years and I'm usually drunk. I often don't know if I'm in a dream or reality. But even in a dream I've never dreamt about the night. The drunkard looked at him and said, because that's what I'm most afraid of. In the long everlasting night, countless people died. No one could retain such a long memory. Only the drunkard and the butcher had that seemingly endless cold and dark memory. It was understandable that they were afraid. After that day the moon suddenly appeared in the night. The butcher and I were surprised, especially when the moon didn't disappear. That's probably what you said before, the hope I once had. The drunkard said, we also thought that we could keep watching. Even though it's annoying to hide, it shouldn't be a problem for us to hold on for another few hundred years. But unfortunately things don't always go our way. Ning Ke felt cold and asked, has Hao Yin found you? The drunkard said, yes. Ning Ke kept silent for a long time and murmured, he couldn't find you for thousands of years. Why did he find you now? The drunkard didn't answer him. He looked up at the blue sky and thought, when he was in the sky he was too far away from the ground. It was hard for him to find us. But if he comes to the human world, where can we hide? Everything was settled. Ning Ke felt very tired. I'm short of 1,000 words today. It's just that the plot is broken here. I'll make it up before the end of the month. Now I'm short of 4,000 words. Remember. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 825. If so, why didn't you do anything when the headmaster was still alive? Second brother was right. Compared to the headmaster and youngest uncle, you are all cowards. But cowards are better than dogs. Ning Ke looked at the drunkard and said, there were actually 3 questions in this simple sentence. They were like 3 knives and 3 hot slaps on the face. The drunkard's expression did not change. He said, if you reach a certain state in cultivation, you will understand that emotions like honor and disgrace are meaningless. Then what's meaningful? Eternity is the only meaning of life, or the only goal that we should pursue. The drunkard looked at the sky and said, in order to reach the other side, to achieve this goal and to fulfill the meaning of life, we are willing to pay any price. Why should we be afraid of being dogs? You should be glad that it was me and not the butcher who showed up outside Chang'an today. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened? Ning Ke said, since you are dogs, you should have been watchdogs in West Hill. This sentence was harsh, but the drunkard's expression did not change. He said calmly, the premise of eternity is existence, and the premise of existence is self. This is what we insist on. Ning Ke understood something from this conversation. He asked, is this the promise you got? The drunkard did not answer his question. He pointed at the carriage in front of the city gate and said, this is for you. At the same time, someone asked me to tell you something. Ning Ke asked, what is it? The drunkard said. He looked calm and even a little dull. It was obvious that he had memorized it without any of his own understanding or feelings. Then he turned around and left. The flagon swayed in the spring breeze, which reminded Ning Ke of the wooden dipper on the eldest brother's waist. Even the way he walked was very similar to the eldest brother. 1 year in the back of the mountain of the academy, the eldest brother was walking on the mountain path in front of him. He seemed to be walking very slowly, but Ning Ke could not catch up with him no matter how hard he tried. He looked at the back of the drunkard and his face was a little pale. He was shocked and did not pay attention to what the drunkard had told him before he left. After several months of war, the Tang Empire and the Academy finally stabilized the situation at great cost. They even saw a bright future. However, at this moment, the drunkard and the butcher, who had been living in seclusion for countless years, appeared. The situation of the world was bound to undergo drastic changes because of this, and the bright road ahead suddenly dimmed. It started to rain in the clear sky. The spring rain was bone-chilling. Ning Ke looked up at the gray sky and remained silent for a long time. He walked into the black carriage and saw a black box in the corner. The black box was very familiar. Even though it was slightly deformed, he still couldn't forget it. This was because the item inside the box had accompanied him through thousands of mountains and rivers, defeating countless powerful enemies. He stretched out his finger and gently stroked the edge of the black box, causing wrinkles to appear in the dust. Then he gently opened the box. The iron bow was still there, and the sharp arrowhead gleamed coldly as if it had been waiting for him. The black carriage came to the shore of Yanming Lake. The horses that were urgently transferred to pull the carriage looked extremely tired. The spring rain washed away a lot of the dust on the walls of the carriage, but the array glyphs were still not activated. Lu Yiqing had been guarding the courtyard gate with his sword in his arms. Hearing the sound of the wheels rolling on the ground, he slowly stood up. Ning Ke carried the black box out of the carriage and walked towards the courtyard. Lu Yiqing suddenly felt a frightening murderous intent. The white cloth covering his eyes had been wet by the spring rain, but it suddenly became dry. He couldn't help but feel shocked, and his right hand suddenly grasped the hilt of his sword. Ning Ke didn't even look at him and just walked past him. He didn't care that the powerhouse in the knowing destiny state from the sword Garrett might pull out his sword at any time. His expression was so calm that it was frightening. Lu Yiqing couldn't pull out his sword because there were cracks on his wrists, and blood oozed out like cracked earth. The white cloth covering his eyes was torn and fell with the cold wind in the rain. Ning Ke walked into the small courtyard by the Yanming Lake. Lu Yiqing held the hilt of his sword and lowered his head. Blood kept dripping from his wrists, and together with the rain falling from the eaves, it made a slight pitter-patter. What a terrible murderous intent and anger. No one could see that Ning Ke was angry with the naked eye, and there was no murderous intent in his eyes. At this moment he was like an abandoned well that no one cared about. He was so quiet that no one could see how deep he was. Yi Hongyu was looking at the plum blossoms in the rain under the porch, holding a bowl of tea in her hand. Ning Ke walked to her and asked, "You know about this?" Yi Hongyu put the bowl of tea on the stone window and said, "Just like you, I just found out." Ning Ke said, "You once told me that the academy would definitely change its mind." Yi Hongyu said, "Someone told me that." Ning Ke asked, "Who?" Yi Hongyu said, "The person who asked me to come to Chang and to negotiate with the academy on behalf of the Divine Hall is naturally the hierarch." Ning Ke said, "The hierarch lord is already a useless person. Or you are telling the truth." Yi Hongyu looked at him and said, "But after the hierarch lord returned to the Divine Hall, no one has seen him again. So even if he is already a useless person, his words are still effective. What he said makes sense. The academy's attitude will change." Ning Ke walked to the stone window and looked at the plum blossoms that grew more and more lively in the spring rain. He said, "But the Divine Hall should know what to do." Yi Hongyu looked at his back and said, "Compared to the sins of the Tangs, the Divine Hall's request is not too much." Ning Ke did not turn around and said, "It is impossible to go to the Divine Hall to ask for forgiveness. The Tangs care about their reputation. This can be removed." Yi Hongyu said, "Other than what we said last time, the Divine Hall also asked for your little emperor to abdicate and that Her Majesty must leave Chang'an. You know why?" Ning Ke was silent for a moment. The plum blossoms in front of him gradually turned from lively to tired under the rain. He said, "You should know very well that when there is no way out, you have to fight with your life." Yi Hongyu said, "You still have a way out. The Li family still has a prince." Ning Ke looked at the plum blossoms and said, "I'll *ck your mother." His voice was calm and his tone was gentle, but it revealed a very firm determination. Yi Hongyu's expression did not change. She said, "My mother is already dead." Ning Ke turned around and looked at her. He said, "Then I'll *ck you." Yi Hongyu said, "Haotian did not give the academy too much time to consider. I think what you need to do now is not to vent your anger and fear, but to discuss with others." Ning Ke stared at her eyes for a long time and then turned to leave. Yi Hongyu stood by the stone window and was silent for a moment. Then she picked up the remaining tea. The golden tea in the bowl rippled. It was not because of the spring rain, but because her hands were a little unsteady. This was the most dangerous Ning Ke she had ever seen. Although he did not seem to do anything with a calm expression and a steady tone, he was actually on the verge of exploding with anger. If she couldn't calm him down, then Ning Ke might really use the power of the God-stunning array to kill her or rape her at all costs. This is 2,000 words. I will write another 5,000 words today. As for that sentence, please don't accuse me of keeping you in suspense. It is because I have thought about it for a few days and still could not figure out how to say it. I have already determined the content and purpose, but I need the right words. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 826. After leaving Yinming Lake, Ning Ke did not go to the palace directly. Instead, he went to the building of pines and cranes for a drink. He did not drink much, and then he took a walk along Vermilion Bird Avenue. He did not walk far, letting the spring rain fall on his head, face and body. Fortunately, the spring rain was gentle and his clothes were not very wet. He gradually calmed down and accepted the infuriating changes of the situation for the Tang Empire and the Academy. He came to Senyuanli. His neighbors were preparing dinner. The smell of cooking oil mixed with the smell of burning firewood. It smelled good and made him feel calmer. He stood at the stone steps in front of the courtyard and waited. After a while, the door of the courtyard was opened with a squeak. Second brother walked out and then there was a squeak in the night. Ning Ke bowed to the knight and the stone steps and said, "The drunkard and Haoyin must have been promised by Haoyin that they could live forever with self-consciousness. That's why they chose to obey." Junimo said, "They can't survive the second everlasting night. That's their biggest fear." Someone in the courtyard lit up the street. The night faded and 2 wheelchairs appeared. Yu Lian said, "The kingdom of Haoyin will never allow self-consciousness to exist." Junimo said, "The wisdom of a coward is no match for the stupidity of a brave man." Eldest brother did not participate in the discussion of his younger brothers and sisters. He looked at the night sky quietly, at the bright moon behind the rain clouds, as if he was looking at the kingdom of Haoyin that would never return. Junimo looked at Ning Ke and said, "Sometimes anger can bring courage, but most of the time it is meaningless." Yulian looked at Ning Ke and said, "Now that you have calmed down, let's continue." Ning Ke understood what his senior brother and senior sister meant and asked, "How?" Yulian said, "You can talk however you want." Ning Ke recalled that he and the Empress had said something similar and looked a little bitter. Eldest brother withdrew his gaze from the night sky and looked at him with a smile. "Little brother, do your best, okay?" It was very quiet in the main hall. Even the light from the candles seemed a little cold. All the eunuchs and palace maids were isolated far away. Only the Empress and Ning Ke were in front of the table. The Empress looked at the letter with a yellow cover on the table and did not speak. Ning Ke looked at the summary dossier of the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps and remained silent. However, he could not remain silent forever. Are there really cultivators who have survived the everlasting night? The Empress looked at Ning Ke and asked. She still found it unbelievable. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "A sage appears every 1,000 years. The drunkard and the butcher have been cultivating in the world for thousands of years." Even though he did not show his divinity outside the city, his state must be beyond the imagination of most ordinary people. In other words, worldly martial arts means nothing to him. The Empress frowned slightly and asked, "Who is stronger, the drunkard or the Abbey Dean?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "The drunkard may be in a higher state, but his strength is not as strong as the Abbey Dean." The Empress was puzzled and asked, "Why is it like this?" He and the butcher have been walking in the darkness for countless years. Both their bodies and bodies have decayed. The Abbey Dean has always been walking in the light. With the departure of the headmaster, he has reached his peak. Ning Ke said, "If either the drunkard or the butcher dares to walk into Chang'an, I have 70% confidence to kill them. Even if they enter Chang'an together, I still have 10% confidence." The Empress said, 10% confidence is basically the same as no confidence at all. Ning Ke said, "If it were other cultivators it would be correct. But since they are facing the drunkard and the butcher, 10% confidence is 100% confidence because they are afraid of death." The Empress said, "How can a grand cultivator with such an unfathomable state not see through life and death? The headmaster once said that cultivation is about time. The longer you live, the more powerful you will be. But the longer you live, the more afraid you will be of death. Eternal life is the greatest temptation, and death is the greatest fear." Ning Ke said, "The drunkard and the butcher are 2 such people. That is why they surrendered to Haoyin. And it is also because of this that they dare not step into Chang'an." The Empress' eyes brightened and said, "Then outside the city? If the 2 senior brothers and senior sister are in their peak state, maybe we can give it a try." Ning Ke thought of the flagon swaying in the spring breeze. He shook his head and said, "The problem now is that maybe no one can find or catch up with the 2. The light in the Empress' eyes gradually faded and she said, "That means the drunkard and the butcher are 2 big knives hanging over the Tang people's heads, and they can fall at any time." Ning Ke said, "The West Hill Divine Palace dares to make these conditions because of this?" The Empress looked at the briefing file on the table and said after a moment of silence, "The existence of the drunkard and the butcher must be a secret. No one can know about it." Ning Ke understood what the Empress meant. The Tang Empire had just come out of desperation. The people's confidence was gradually recovering, and the morale of the army was high. The southern battlefront army had fought so hard, but they still refused to completely block the Verdant Canyon because everyone was waiting for the day to counterattack. If the Tang people knew about the existence of the drunkard and the butcher, their morale would definitely be seriously affected. A war without the possibility of counterattack would be endless torture for everyone. Ning Ke looked into the Empress' eyes and said, "How do the Imperial Court and the Academy explain the agreement with the West Hill Divine Palace? The land ceded by the Tang Empire and the war reparations will definitely be known by people." The Empress smiled and said, "Humiliation brings courage and anger. If there is a way to release the anger, then the purest courage will be left." Ning Ke felt that the Empress's smile was beautiful, but somehow he felt cold. How could he let the Tang people completely release the anger brought by the humiliation of the agreement? He didn't want to think further and he felt that he was thinking too much. The people can hide it for the time being, but the ministers in the court must know the truth. The Academy doesn't want the court to fall into chaos again because of this. Since they are supported by the people, they should bear the mental pressure for the people at this time. The Empress thought for a while and agreed with him. She rang the little golden bell on the table. It didn't take long for more than 10 of the most important ministers to come to the night hall. The ministers were a little tired after entering the palace in the middle of the night. But thinking that the palace was urging them so urgently, they were afraid that the war in the northern borderline had started again, or the negotiation with the West Hill Divine Palace had gone wrong. They didn't dare to be negligent. Even though they had thought that the situation was very bad, they still didn't expect that the news waiting for them in the palace would be so terrible. For a moment, the night hall was silent. "We can agree to any other conditions," a tired voice sounded in the hall. It was General Xu Cheng who had just returned to Chang'an. The expression of the general was very sorrowful because he knew that this treaty would be an indelible humiliation for the Tang Empire. Every single one of those conditions was like a thorn whipping his heart. But those conditions could be agreed to. Under such a serious situation, the Tang Empire had no other choice. But one of the conditions proposed by the West Hill Divine Palace was unacceptable. He looked at the Empress and Ning Ke and said word by word, "We can't give up the Xiangwan Plain." The western army of the Tang Empire withdrew from the Pamir Mountains and most of them joined the northern army under the command of General Su Qi. They were prepared for the possible war with the Golden Tribe cavalry in late spring. General Xu Cheng returned to Chang and so that Su Qi could lead the two armies. At the same time, the military ministry of Chang needed a powerful general. He objected to the ceding of the Xiangwan Plain not because the military couldn't bear the humiliation, but because of the importance of the Xiangwan Plain. The Xiangwan Plain was located in the south of the 7 stockade villages in the northern borderline of the Tang Empire. It was a natural grassland that stretched for thousands of miles. It was the most suitable place for raising horses, and it was also the main source of the Tang Empire's war horses. One of the important reasons why the Tang Empire's cavalry could dominate the world was that the Xiangwan Plain had been providing the best war horses for thousands of years. The most important condition of the West Hill Divine Palace's negotiation was to cede the Xiangwan Plain on behalf of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, which was absolutely unacceptable to the Tang Empire. Last autumn, the Golden Tribe Royal Court's cavalry invaded the south like a pack of wolves. The Tang Empire's internal strife was still ongoing. The cavalry that followed His Majesty to the wilderness was trapped in Helan City. The northern army was seriously unprepared and the 7 stockade villages were defeated one after another. However, even under such a serious situation, General Su Qi never thought of retreating. The northern army paid an unimaginable price and finally stopped the Golden Tribe cavalry from advancing 100 miles to the south of the 7 stockade villages. Why? Because the Tang Empire had to keep the Xiangwan Plain. The horse farm was the foundation of the Tang Empire's prosperity for thousands of years. It was the foundation of the Tang Empire's army. Could even be said that the Xiangwan Plain was the Tang Empire. The Golden Tribe Royal Court's cavalry was the Tang Empire's greatest enemy. If the Xiangwan Plain was ceded, the Golden Tribe Royal Court would definitely become more powerful, and the Tang Empire would become weaker. A civil official said in confusion, "Compared to ceding Dongshan County, this grassland is nothing. Even if we lose some war horses, we can always get them back from the Golden Tribe in the future." Even at this moment, the officials of the Tang Empire still had a strong sense of optimism and confidence. Shu Qing said coldly, "The divine halls of West Hill want us to pay for the war horses and cede the Xiangwan plain. In the future, even if the Tang Empire has good armors and weapons, it will have no mounts. How can we get them back? Since they have made such a plan, they will not leave any loopholes. They are trying to destroy the foundation of the Tang Empire." He was most worried that the Empress and the Academy did not understand the importance of the Xiangwan plain. He looked at Ning Ke and said sternly, "If we cede the Xiangwan plain to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, the Tang Empire will not be far from being destroyed." The Empress looked at Ning Ke and said, "If we cede the Xiangwan plain, the Tang Empire will not be able to recover within 100 years. The divine halls of West Hill must be aware of this. That's why they made such a request." Ning Ke looked at the files on the table and did not make a decision for a long time. There is a chapter of 2,000 words left. Try to finish it before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 827. Ning Ke had lived in the city of Wei for many years and naturally knew the importance of the Xiangwan plain. The war in the human world was divided into two sides. The Academy would fight against the drunkard and the butcher, and the sage of sword Liu Bai and the reclusive sublime beings of Taoism. The rest of the enemies would be wiped out by the Tang cavalry. The cavalry of the Tang Empire was the strongest cavalry in the world. As long as they adapted to the battlefield, they could directly kill all the cultivators in the 5 regions. What happened in the Verdant Canyon would not happen again because there was no second academy in the world, and no one in the back mountain of the academy. If the Tang Empire really agreed to the conditions of the West Hill Divine Palace and ceded the Xiangwan Plain to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, it would be equivalent to cutting off its own arms and giving up its most powerful weapon. No matter what, Ning Ke should not have agreed to this condition. But he was clear about the key point of the Divine Halls of West Hill's negotiation, and even the real purpose of the drunkard's appearance in Chang and was Xiangwan Plain. The night hall was silent. Everyone, including the Empress, was waiting for him to express his attitude. Because at this time, the attitude of the Academy was equal to the attitude of the Tang Empire. Ning Ke stood up, looked at the ministers and said, "Let's talk to them first. I'll think about it." No one could make a decision in such a short period of time. That night, Ning Ke returned to the house by the Yanming Lake, but he did not look for Yi Hongyu. Early in the morning, the sound of chickens and dogs barking could be heard in the streets. Before the steamed bun shop opened its doors, a hot mist seeped out from the cracks in the door. The mist was blown by the morning wind and landed on the street, wetting the stone slabs. A new day dawned. The imperial court continued to negotiate with the diplomatic corps of the West Hill Divine Palace. According to the news from the palace, the Divine Hall seemed to be very tough, which was different from a few days ago, especially when it came to the cession of the Xiangwan Plain. Ning Ke understood where the Divine Hall's confidence came from. He waved his hand to let the official of the Imperial Center Administration leave. He got up and had a bowl of porridge. Then he came to the plum garden, pushed open the door and walked in. Yi Hongyu liked to take a bath in the morning because she liked to spend every day refreshed. When Ning Ke walked into her room, she had just come out of the shower. Her wet, black hair fell over her bare shoulders, the ends dripping with water, covering her breasts. Yi Hongyu glanced at him and walked to the bronze mirror to comb her hair. She asked, "Have you decided?" As she combed her hair, her black hair was combed from the front to the back, and it could be seen clearly in the mirror. Ning Ke asked, "Decide what?" Yi Hongyu said, "Sign it." Ning Ke shook his head. Yi Hongyu saw him shake his head in the mirror and her hand that was holding the comb stiffened. She said, "I thought you had made up your mind, so I was unhappy and wanted to rape me." Ning Ke said, "Although you are very beautiful." Yi Hongyu said, "Even thinking about it, it's not a good thing." Ning Ke said, "At least I haven't thought about it." Yi Hongyu said, "I am not wearing any clothes, but you are staring at me. What are you thinking about?" Ning Ke said, "This is my home. Besides, I've already seen you naked in the swamp in the wasteland." Yi Hongyu asked calmly, "I've never asked you before. Does it look good?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Your body is indeed very attractive, but I have no interest in your gown of judgment and the money under your skin." Yi Hongyu got up and put on the blood-colored robe of judgment. She began to draw her eyebrows in front of the mirror. The robe of judgment was a combination of holiness and coldness. It looked even more attractive when it covered her delicate white jade-like body. Ning Ke knew that there was nothing under the robe. She did not wear the maidservant dress because she was the great divine priest of judgment. The Tang Empire cannot keep the Xiangwan Plain. The Divine Hall can make concessions in any aspect, but not the Xiangwan Plain. Otherwise, the war against the Tang Empire will be meaningless, she said as she drew her eyebrows. Ning Ke looked at the charcoal pencil that was drawing between her eyebrows and said, "Life is not for." Before he could finish, Yi Hongyu said, "People in the academy live for meaning, but more people live for meaning. The Divine Hall has to give an explanation to all the countries in the world." Ning Ke said, "I think the other conditions are enough." Yi Hongyu put down the eyebrow pencil and took out a piece of red rouge paper from her makeup box. She looked at Ning Ke in the mirror and said, "Then how will the Divine Hall explain to itself in Haotian?" She gently pursed her lips, which were as bright as red plums. Then she turned around and looked at Ning Quebec. She tore the rouge paper in her hand into two. "We all understand that when the Tang Empire and the Academy recover, any agreement will be useless. We can't let the Tang Empire continue to be powerful. Therefore the Xiangwan Plain must be ours." The West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps was still tough. The officials of the Tang Empire who participated in the negotiation were in a very passive position. Perhaps some hot-blooded young official leaked the news, but the details of the negotiation and the humiliating conditions from the Divine Hall were gradually known by the people of the Tang Empire. In particular, the two conditions of ceding the Xiangwan Plain and Dongshan Commandery made the Tang people extremely angry. The Tang Empire had never been so humiliated in thousands of years. From the northern borderline to capital Qing, from the Pamir Mountains to the Vermilion Bird Avenue, countless people from the Tang Empire had died in this war before the situation was finally reversed. They did not lose the war. Why did they have to sign such a humiliating treaty? For a moment, the whole city was in an uproar. The hawkers were not in the mood. The hot and sour noodle slice soup seemed to have lost some of its flavor. They were not in the mood to do anything. Who could sit at home peacefully? Countless citizens, students, and injured soldiers who had retired from the front line spontaneously came to the square in front of the palace. No one made any trouble or even made any noise. Thousands of people just stood outside the palace in silence. They stood in the cold spring rain until late at night and still did not disperse. Thousands of people gathered together, but there was no sound. The silence outside the palace was an indescribable pressure for the people inside. The officials who knew the inside story suddenly aged a lot. Many people were waiting that night and some were doing other things. It was not that they did not have the anger of the ordinary Tang people, but because they had to start thinking about the future. At the back of the mountain of the academy, Muyu carried a wooden basket and walked among the clouds on the mountainside. Every once in a while she would take out a small flag from the basket and stick it in the soil or between the mountain rocks. The tactical array of the cloud gate was taught to her by the headmaster of the academy. It was an important protective array for the back of the mountain. When she was in the Verdant Canyon, there was no one to control the tactical array. It was broken by the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and was severely damaged. Although the Abbey Dean was seriously injured now, the drunkard and the butcher were like new dark clouds hanging over the hearts of the disciples of the academy. She had to hurry to repair them so that she could be at ease. The blacksmith house by the stream was still quiet. The sixth brother leaned on the iron hammer and looked at the forest at night in a daze. A gentle voice came from the room behind him from time to time. One is limitless and the other is almost immortal. It seems that no one can kill them as long as they don't enter Chang'an. But I always remember what the headmaster said. The eldest brother gently moved his fingers in the yellow sand of the river and mountain sandbox and said gently, "Except for Haotian, there is no omniscient and omnipotent person in the world. In this case they must be killed. So we should start to calculate now. I think it will be a very complicated work." The fourth brother said, "I'd like to discuss it with you." Yulian sat on the edge of the cliff and meditated. Her fingers wrote in the wind from time to time. Tang Xiaotang widened the stone steps on the steep mountain road. The blood-red giant knife in her hand became more and more like a big iron stick. The little white wolf was lying on the stone steps above, bored. The wind suddenly rose among the cliffs and went straight to the night sky. It blew away the clouds and revealed the bright moon. The little white wolf began to howl at the bright moon. But its voice was still tender without any momentum. Junimo stood by the pool. Zhang San and Li Si welcomed the washing of the waterfall. He was comprehending the swordsmanship. The big white goose beside him washed its feet in the pool water. The little white wolf's howl came from the cliff. The big white goose raised its head and looked at the cliff contemptuously. Then it bent its neck and sang to the moon. Quack. At this time, Ning Kai was standing on the corner tower of the imperial city. He looked at the bright moon in the night sky and the dense but quiet crowd under the city. He seemed to hear something and then remembered something. He laughed. Good night. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 828. Ning Kai looked into the Empress's eyes and said, Shame brings courage and anger. If the anger can be released, the rest will be courage. These are your words. Now we need to consider who will bear the anger of the Tangs. The Empress did not answer. Ning Kai continued, After we cede the Xiangwan plain, the Academy will solve the problem of the warhorses. The Empress shook her head and said, No matter how strong the Academy is, it can't create something out of nothing. Ning Kai said, I will take back everything I lost in the future. The Empress did not understand where his confidence came from, but was finally convinced by his firm tone. After thinking for a moment, she said seriously, In that case, I will sign it. Ning Kai said, You can't sign it, because we can't let you and His Majesty bear the anger of the people. The Empress said, But you once said that the Academy can't sign it, because this agreement will be reneged. Ning Kai said, The Westhill Divine Palace is well prepared. They will definitely ask me or even my senior brother to sign it. As for the Imperial Court, Yi Hongyu is right. We still have a way out. The Empress was extremely smart and immediately understood what he meant. She disagreed and said, The one sitting on the throne is my son, so I have to bear the corresponding responsibilities and obligations. It makes no difference whether I or anyone else in the Li family sign it. At least it can form a buffer. Ning Kai said, As a member of the Li royal family, you have to sign your name on such a humiliating treaty. Only death can appease the anger of the people. And in this situation you cannot die, Empress. The Academy has entered the human realm. Mr. First promised to educate my son, and there will be no more disputes in the Imperial Court. In fact, if I think about it carefully, it is no longer important to the Tang Empire. The Empress smiled and said, And for me now, death is really not scary. Ning Kai naturally could not push the Empress to the front. He left the palace that night and went to the prince's mansion. The candlelight in the study was dim. Li Peiyin still looked handsome and amiable, but there were more wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. His once sharp eyebrows had also become very soft. I've never had any big ambitions in my life. I just want to help my brother make up for his shortcomings and represent the royal family to ease the relationship between the royal family and the Dao sect. At most, I want to be a virtuous king who will leave his name in history. Li Peiyin looked at Ning Kai and said with a self-deprecating smile, Now that I think about it, if I wasn't born into the emperor's family, I believe I would be more useful than I am now. This is where His Highness's problem lies. Ning Kai said, In this great era your thoughts are too trivial. Moreover, you have given in too much to the divine hall. Ning Kai said after a moment of silence, I promise you, once the treaty is signed, as long as the Westhill Divine Palace Coalition Army leaves Qinghe Prefecture, I will send the people in the Qinghe Guild Hall back. In the early morning the spring rain fell again and the dust fell to the ground. The Tang Empire agreed to most of the demands made by the Westhill Divine Palace. Prince Li Peiyin solemnly signed his name on the treaty, and at the same time, wrote his name on the pillar of shame in history. When the news spread, there was an uproar in the imperial court. No one knew what had happened in this long night, and why the bigwigs in the palace dared to sign the treaty, even though they would be condemned by the whole world. The Tangs gathered in front of the imperial palace could no longer control their emotions. They cursed angrily and spat at the red palace wall. Then some old rumors spread among the crowd. Those old rumors were not actually rumors but things that everyone knew. For example, the massacre of the village in the Yen territory, the close relationship between the prince and the Westhill Divine Palace hierarch, and the murder of a certain Taoist sect in Chang'an. That was why he was demoted to a commoner by the former emperor, and his title was only restored when Li Huiyuan ascended to the throne. The palace gate opened slowly, and Li Peiyin walked towards the crowd. He wore a dark robe with black and red embroidery with gold. It was especially eye-catching in the light spring rain that fell in the early morning. Countless people looked at him, their eyes full of contempt and anger. Some even tried to rush over and beat him up. A low-ranking official in the Yamen asked painfully why the imperial court ceded Dongshan County and Xiangwan Plain. The official's voice was really painful, as if he was bleeding. Countless people were questioning and scolding. Did the imperial court not want to take back Qinghe Prefecture? Why did they send the traitors in the Qinghe Guild Hall back? The front of the palace was full of voices with the smell of blood. If it were not for the heavy protection of the Yulin royal guards, Li Peiyin would have been torn to pieces by now. Li Peiyin suddenly stopped and looked around at the sea of angry people. His expression was calm, but the expression in the depths of his eyes was very complicated. The crowd gradually quieted down. What? There is not so much reason in the world. The Tang Empire needs time, and I will buy time for you. The Tang Empire needs peace, and I will fight for peace for you. If the whole world attacks the Tang Empire, what will the Tang Empire do? Can it really be the enemy of the world? If you think that I am wrong, prove it to me in the future. His expression was very indifferent, but his hands and his sleeves kept trembling. Li Peiyin returned to the prince's mansion. The angry people surrounded the prince's mansion. The students of the academy and the imperial college were in the city helping the Ministry of Works to repair the houses damaged in the war. After hearing the news, they carried countless bricks and stones to the prince's mansion. The soldiers and guards of the Yulin royal guards were ready, but their numbers were too small to frighten the angry people. Angry slogans echoed around the prince's mansion. Some people even took out tung oil and lit torches. At the most tense moment, a sad cry suddenly sounded inside the walls of the prince's mansion. A white banner stretched out behind the prince's mansion. Prince Li Peiyin of the Tang Empire was dead. The street became extremely quiet. Looking at the white banner in the spring rain, people put down the bricks and stones in their hands, and the newly lit torches gradually extinguished. Ning Ke stood at the entrance of the alley in the distance, quietly watching the scene. There was no emotional fluctuation on his face. Li Peiyin signed the peace treaty on behalf of the Tang Empire. For the West Hill Divine Palace, it did not mean the end of the negotiation or the final victory, because the Divine Hall still needed the Academy's signature. If possible, of course they would prefer Mr. First, who was famous for his benevolence, or Mr. Second, who was polite and honest. However, there was only one person in the academy who entered the human realm, and that was Ning Quebec. At this time, Yanming Lake was shrouded in the misty spring rain, but it was not sad. Everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace Diplomatic Corps and the Grand Secretaries of the Tang Empire were in the hall. No one spoke and everyone had different feelings. Needless to say, the West Hill Divine Palace, Grand Secretary Zheng Jing and other officials of the Tang Empire looked very solemn. Everyone was waiting for Ning Ke to come back and sign. Yi Hongyu was also waiting in the plum garden, but Ning Ke did not appear, because he went to a place before returning to Yanming Lake. In front of the Guild Hall of Qinghe County was a straight street, and behind it were lakes and mountains. At this time it was also misty in the spring rain, and the scenery was very beautiful. Several guards and more than 20 members of the Fish Dragon gang were vigilantly watching the movements around the Guild Hall. When Chang'an City was in turmoil that night, the descendants of the warlords of Qinghe County in the Guild Hall took advantage of the chaos to escape. After that, it took a lot of effort to catch these people, and they did not want such a thing to happen again. If they knew that these people in the Guild Hall were about to be sent back to Qinghe County, they did not know how angry they would be. It was at this moment that Ning Ke walked into the Guild Hall of Qinghe County. He took the towel and wiped his hair that was wet from the spring rain, and dusted off the water droplets on his clothes, as natural as if he was returning home.